Kings can command armies, close city gates, and make an entire nation live with the consequences of their choices. Elijah had none of that power. He entered the royal court with no soldiers behind him and no visible protection around him. Yet when he spoke, the rain stopped. Before his work was finished, kings would discover that a throne could not silence the word he carried, and one grieving mother would discover that even death did not place her child beyond its reach. Elijah appears suddenly, identified only as a Tishbite from the region of Gilead. There is no account of his childhood, his training, or the road that brought him to the king. He simply stands before Ahab and delivers a declaration with the force of an oath. As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. It was a direct challenge to the king, but Elijah did not present the drought as a contest between two powerful men. Ahab sat on Israel's throne. Elijah stood before the living God. That was the relationship that defined him, and it placed the king beneath a judgment he could not reverse by decree. The sentence included both rain and dew. Israel was not being warned about a disappointing season or a reduced harvest. The ordinary sources of moisture were being withdrawn, and the duration was left open. The drought would end only when the same prophetic word that had announced it authorized the rain to return. Then Elijah disappeared from Ahab's reach. The Lord directed him eastward, away from the centers of royal power, to the Kerith ravine beyond the Jordan. There he would drink from the brook, and ravens would bring him food. Elijah did as he was told. He left, settled beside the brook, and lived on what arrived each day. The ravens brought bread and meat in the morning, then bread and meat again in the evening. Water remained available in the ravine. Nothing about Elijah's new circumstances resembled the position of a man who had just confronted a king. He had announced a national disaster, but he was not placed in command of what followed. He was hidden beside a stream, receiving each meal rather than producing it, and drinking from the same diminishing source on which his continued survival depended. The drought did not spare the prophet who had announced it. As the days passed without rain, the brook began to fail. Eventually it dried up because there had been no rain in the land. That drying brook did not mean Elijah's first instruction had failed. It meant the judgment was taking effect. The water that had sustained him was part of the land now being deprived of water. When that source was gone, Elijah received another command. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. I have commanded a widow there to feed you. The direction was striking. Elijah was being sent beyond Israel's territory to a town associated with Sidon, and the person appointed to sustain him was a widow. She was not introduced as a wealthy patron with reserves sufficient to outlast the drought. Nothing visible at the beginning of their meeting suggested that she could feed even her own household for long. Elijah obeyed and went to Zarephath. When he reached the entrance of the town, he saw a widow gathering sticks. He called to her and asked her to bring him a little water in a vessel so that he could drink. She turned to get it. Then, as she was going, he added another request. Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. The request for water had already placed a demand on a town living under drought. The request for bread exposed the full severity of the widow's condition. She answered Elijah with an oath, invoking the God he served. As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. She was gathering 2 sticks so that she could go home and prepare what remained for herself and her son. They would eat it, and then, as she put it, they would die. This was not a general fear about what a continuing shortage might eventually bring. She had reached the end of her provisions. 1 handful of flour, a little oil, and enough fuel for a final preparation were all she named. Elijah had arrived at the house of the person appointed to feed him, just as she was preparing to divide her last food between herself and her child. He did not dispute her inventory. He did not tell her that the jar contained more than she could see. First, he answered the fear created by what she did see. Do not fear. Go and do as you have said. Then he gave her an instruction that made the decision immediate. First, make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward make something for yourself and your son. Elijah was asking her to act before there was visible evidence that anything would remain afterward. But the request came with a precise promise. The jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day the Lord sends rain upon the earth. The promise was not that her storeroom would suddenly overflow. It concerned the 2 containers she had just described as nearly exhausted. The flour would not run out. The oil would not fail. The provision would continue until rain returned and the drought itself came to an end. The widow went and did what Elijah had told her. She prepared food for him, and the promised provision held. Elijah, the widow, and her household ate for many days. Each use of the flour and oil brought them back to the same condition of dependence, but never to the emptiness she had expected. The jar did not spend itself, and the jug did not fail in accordance with the word Elijah had spoken. The man who had declared that the sky would give no rain was now living inside a widow's house on food that did not run out. The 2 events were not opposites. Both depended on the same authority. Across the wider land, no king could command water to fall. Inside this house, scarcity could not consume the small provision that had been placed under promise. Yet the preservation of their food did not remove every danger from the household. After these things, the widow's son became ill. His sickness grew severe until no breath remained in him. The woman turned to Elijah. Her words were not a quiet request for another measure of flour or oil. "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." She connected Elijah's presence with exposure and judgment. The man of God had entered her home, her food had been preserved, and now her only son lay dead. The continued flour and oil had kept them alive through the drought, but that preservation seemed to have led to a loss even more devastating than the starvation she had expected at the gate. Elijah did not answer her accusation with an explanation. He said, "Give me your son." He took the child from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his own bed. Away from the mother, Elijah cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" Elijah had spoken judgment to Ahab without hesitation. Here his words took another form. He appealed for the woman who had received him. He named her as the widow with whom he was staying, the woman whose endangered household had become his refuge. Her obedience had provided him food. The promise he carried had preserved her supplies. Now her son was dead, and Elijah brought that death directly before God. Then he stretched himself over the child 3 times and cried out again, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." He did not claim that the boy had never truly died. He asked for the child's life to return. The request was as direct as the crisis. Death had taken the widow's son, and only restored life would answer it. The Lord listened to Elijah. The child's life returned to him, and he revived. Elijah lifted the boy from the bed, carried him down from the upper room, and brought him to his mother. The woman who had expected to prepare a final meal had received food enough to survive the drought. Then she had held her son without breath. Now Elijah placed the living child before her. "See," he said, "your son lives." Her answer marked a recognition deeper than the one she had expressed when Elijah first asked for bread. "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." She had already watched the flour remain in the jar and the oil remain in the jug. She had lived for many days by the promise Elijah delivered. But the return of her son brought her to an explicit conclusion about Elijah himself and the word he carried. This stranger from Gilead was a man of God. What he spoke in the Lord's name was true. That recognition came far from Ahab's palace. The first person to say it was not a king, an Israelite official, or a crowd gathered for a public sign. It was a widow in Sidonian territory, standing beside the son who had been returned to her alive. Inside her home, the movement had gone from a final handful of food to sustained provision, and from death to restored life. Outside it, the judgment Elijah had announced was still advancing. The streams, fields, households, and royal administration of Israel remained under a sky that gave neither dew nor rain. Ahab still occupied the throne, and the king had not withdrawn the choices that brought Elijah before him. Elijah had been hidden while the force of his declaration became impossible to ignore. He had learned that the word sustaining him did not depend on a permanent brook, an abundant household, or even Israel's borders. He had also carried that word into a room where a child lay dead and brought the living boy back to his mother. But the drought had never been meant to end quietly in Zarephath. The prophet who vanished after confronting Ahab would have to return, and by then the king had been searching far beyond his own palace for the man whose word had closed the heavens. After many days, in the third year, the word came to Elijah again. "Go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." The next movement was as direct as the first. Elijah had been told to hide, and he had hidden. Now he was told to appear, and he went to appear before Ahab. The promise of rain did not cancel the danger of that return. It explained why the return had become necessary. The drought had begun with a word delivered to the king, and the release from drought would also involve a confrontation with the king. Elijah could not remain in the widow's upper room while the crisis in Israel reached its decisive point. By then, the famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab called Obadiah, the man responsible for his household. Obadiah occupied a position of trust within the royal establishment, but his relationship to Ahab did not define his deepest loyalty. He feared the Lord greatly. That loyalty had already forced him to act under dangerous conditions. When Jezebel cut off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah took 100 of them and hid them in caves, 50 in one cave and 50 in another. He supplied them with bread and water. The division into two groups gave 100 endangered prophets 2 concealed places of refuge. Feeding them required continuing provision during the same famine that now threatened the king's animals. Obadiah had carried out that work while remaining in charge of Ahab's household. The royal court contained Jezebel, who was destroying the Lord's prophets, and Obadiah, who was keeping 100 of them alive. Ahab now gave him a different assignment. Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive and not lose all the animals. The search revealed how far the drought had advanced. A king who once sent men across kingdoms looking for Elijah was now sending his chief household officer through Israel looking for grass. Springs and valleys offered the remaining places where water and vegetation might still be found. The objective was no longer abundance. It was to keep horses and mules alive and prevent the loss of all the animals. Ahab and Obadiah divided the land between them. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. Their separation placed Obadiah on a road where 2 parts of his life were about to collide. He was carrying out Ahab's order when Elijah came toward him. Obadiah recognized him. He fell on his face and asked, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" Elijah answered without concealment, "It is I. Go, tell your lord, Elijah is here." The instruction was simple. Obadiah had found the man Ahab had been seeking, and Elijah wanted the king informed. Yet Obadiah did not leave at once. He answered with a question that exposed the danger he associated with carrying that message. "How have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me?" Obadiah was not asking whether Ahab wanted to see Elijah. He knew the scale of the king's search. "As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you." When a nation or kingdom said Elijah was not there, Ahab required an oath confirming that they had not found him. The search had passed beyond Israel's own territory, and Ahab had refused to accept a simple report of failure. Now Elijah stood beside Obadiah and said, "Go, tell your Lord, Elijah is here." Obadiah repeated the instruction because the words created a specific risk. He could go to Ahab and report that Elijah had appeared, but he could not control what happened after he left Elijah's presence. "As soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you where I do not know." Then Ahab would arrive, fail to find Elijah, and kill the messenger who had brought the report. Obadiah's fear centered on an outcome he believed Elijah's previous disappearance made possible. Ahab's search had failed across nations and kingdoms. If Obadiah now claimed to have located Elijah and the prophet was gone when the king arrived, his own long service would not protect him. He appealed to the life he had already lived before the Lord. "I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth." Then he asked whether Elijah had heard what happened during Jezebel's attack on the prophets. "Has it not been told my Lord what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord?" Obadiah described the same rescue that defined his hidden work inside Ahab's administration. He had concealed 100 prophets of the Lord, 50 in one cave and 50 in another, and sustained them with bread and water. His point was not that this service entitled him to safety. He placed it beside the danger Elijah's command now seemed to create. A man who had risked himself to preserve the Lord's prophets was being told by the Lord's most wanted prophet to carry a message that could cost him his life. And now you say, "Go, tell your Lord, Elijah is here, and he will kill me." Obadiah had made the conflict clear. Ahab was his earthly lord, and Elijah told him to report to Ahab. But Obadiah had feared the Lord from his youth, and that fear had already put him in opposition to Jezebel's violence. He was neither outside the palace nor aligned with everything done inside it. His position forced him to serve openly while protecting prophets in secret. Elijah answered the immediate danger with an oath. "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today." It was the same defining claim Elijah had made when he first appeared before Ahab. He stood before the Lord. His movements were governed by that authority. Obadiah would not carry a message that depended on Elijah remaining in place by accident or personal preference. Elijah had been commanded to show himself to Ahab, and he bound his promise to the living Lord. The meeting would happen that day. Obadiah accepted his word. He went to meet Ahab and told him. The man who had feared being killed for an unverifiable report now delivered the announcement Elijah had given him. Ahab turned and went to meet Elijah. For years, the drought had stood between them. Ahab had searched across kingdoms, while Elijah remained at Kerith and then in Zarephath. The king had not found him through royal effort. Their meeting occurred when Elijah received the command to appear and sent Obadiah to bring Ahab to him. When Ahab saw Elijah, the king spoke first. "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" The accusation placed the nation's suffering on the prophet who had announced the drought. Elijah had spoken, the rain had stopped, and the famine had become severe. From Ahab's position, the man standing before him was the disturber of Israel. Elijah rejected the charge. "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house." Then he named the conduct behind the accusation. "You have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." The drought had made Elijah visible as Ahab's opponent. But Elijah refused to let the conflict be reduced to a king's anger at a prophet. The trouble did not begin when Elijah entered the palace and spoke. It began with the royal house's abandonment of the Lord's commands and its pursuit of the Baals. That answer reversed the confrontation. Ahab stood before the man he called Israel's trouble, only to hear that the king himself and his father's house had brought the nation into its present crisis. Elijah did not stop with the accusation. He gave Ahab a command that would turn their private confrontation into a national one. Now, therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel. The king, who had sent throughout the surrounding nations to look for Elijah, was now told to use his reach in a different way. He was to summon Israel to one place at Elijah's request. Elijah specified who else must be gathered. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. These were not isolated worshippers summoned from obscurity. Elijah identified 850 prophets by their connection to Jezebel's table. The conflict that Obadiah had described in hidden caves would now be brought into the open. Jezebel had cut off the Lord's prophets while supporting the prophets Elijah demanded to face. Yet the 100 prophets Obadiah had preserved were not called out of hiding for this confrontation. Elijah named himself as the one to whom Israel and the royal prophets were to be gathered. The man who had lived beside a brook, depended on ravens, received food from a widow, and carried a dead child into an upper room, now required the king to assemble the nation and Jezebel's prophets at Carmel. Ahab had come searching for the person he blamed. Elijah gave him a gathering to arrange. The command also changed the scale of what was about to happen. Their first encounter had taken place between prophet and king. The drought had then spread the consequence across the land. At Carmel, Israel would be present, and the competing prophetic claims supported by the royal house would be placed before the people together. Obadiah's appearance had already revealed that the lines were more complicated than Ahab's accusation allowed. Within the king's own household stood a man who feared the Lord greatly. While Jezebel killed prophets, that same official hid 100 and kept them alive. While Ahab searched for Elijah, Obadiah became the one who recognized him, bowed before him, carried his message, and brought the king to the appointed meeting. Now Elijah had named the central issue aloud. Israel's trouble was tied to abandoned commandments and the pursuit of the Baals. The drought had forced the consequences of that conflict into every search for water and grass. Carmel would force the conflict itself into public view. The proposed assembly also placed Ahab in an unexpected position. He had called Elijah the troubler of Israel, but he did not seize control of the exchange. Elijah answered the charge, identified the royal house's offense, named the mountain, and specified the participants. The next movement depended on Ahab sending the summons Elijah required. 450 prophets of Baal were to come. 400 prophets of Asherah connected to Jezebel's table were also named. All Israel was to be gathered. The meeting would not turn on Elijah's ability to remain hidden or Ahab's ability to search. It would take place in the open, before the people whose land had endured the drought. Elijah had promised Obadiah that he would show himself to Ahab that day, and he had kept that promise. The assurance protected Obadiah from delivering an empty report. But Elijah's appearance did more than end the king's search. It required Ahab to face the accusation behind the drought and to bring the religious establishment, supported by his house, to Carmel. The king and prophet now stood together after years without rain. Around them, the famine remained severe. The royal search for grass had been interrupted by the discovery of the man Ahab had been unable to find. And instead of asking Ahab for protection or defending himself further against the title of troubler, Elijah demanded a public confrontation. The place was chosen. The participants were named. Israel would be called to watch. What remained untested was the question beneath every other conflict. When the prophets stood before the nation and called upon the power they served, which voice would answer? Ahab sent word throughout Israel and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah came near to all the people. The drought had brought them to the mountain, but the first question was not about rain. How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. Elijah demanded more than recognition of whichever power could end the famine. He demanded a choice of allegiance. If the Lord was God, Israel must follow the Lord. If Baal was God, Israel must follow Baal. Continuing between the two was itself the condition Elijah challenged. The people did not answer him a word. Their silence left Elijah to define the test. I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Then he asked for 2 bulls. Baal's prophets would choose one for themselves, cut it into pieces, and place it on wood. They were not to set the wood on fire. Elijah would prepare the other bull and place it on wood without setting fire to it. The 2 sides would then call upon the name of the power they served. You call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. The test was public, visible, and understandable. Each sacrifice would be prepared. Each appeal would be made. Human hands would provide no flame. The answer had to come from the one being called. The people finally responded. It is well spoken. Elijah turned first to the prophets of Baal. Choose for yourselves 1 bull, and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. They took the bull given to them and prepared it. From morning until noon, they called on the name of Baal. "O Baal, answer us!" Their voices continued, but there was no voice in reply. No answer came. They limped around the altar they had made. The movement echoed the question Elijah had asked Israel. The people had been limping between 2 opinions. Now Baal's prophets limped around an altar from which no response came. At noon, Elijah began to mock them. Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is deep in thought, or he has stepped away, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. Elijah's mockery pushed the claims about Baal into their full absurdity. If Baal truly possessed the power attributed to him, then his silence required an explanation. Was he occupied, absent, traveling, asleep? The prophets answered the silence by increasing their own efforts. They cried aloud. Following their custom, they cut themselves with swords and lances until blood flowed over them. The sacrifice lay prepared. The wood remained unlit. The prophets' bodies now bore the force of their appeal, but the altar still gave them nothing. Noon passed. They continued in their prophetic frenzy until the time of the evening offering. There was no voice, there was no answer, there was no response. The long duration mattered because the failure could not be attributed to a prayer ended too soon. Baal's prophets had been given the first choice of bull, the first preparation, and hours in which to call. They had raised their voices, moved around the altar, and cut themselves. The silence remained complete. Then Elijah called to the people, "Come near to me." The people came near, and Elijah repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, corresponding to the number of the tribes descended from the sons of Jacob, the man to whom the Lord had said, "Israel shall be your name." With those stones, Elijah built an altar in the name of the Lord. The 12 stones placed the confrontation before Israel as one people. Elijah was not establishing a private altar for himself or creating a monument to his victory over the other prophets. He rebuilt the Lord's altar and formed it from stones that represented the name and identity of the nation now watching. Around the altar, he made a trench large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he gave an unexpected command. Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. During a drought severe enough to force the king to search for grass, water was poured over the sacrifice. Elijah did not ask for a light sprinkling. 4 full jars were emptied over the offering and the wood. Do it a second time, he said. They did it a second time. Do it a third time. They did it a third time. Water ran around the altar and filled the trench. Everything that human hands had prepared for burning was now soaked. The bull, the wood, the altar, and the ground surrounding it had all received the water. The trench held what ran down. Baal's prophets had been forbidden to place fire beneath their sacrifice, but their altar had remained dry. Elijah went further. He made the condition of his own offering openly resistant to an ordinary flame. When the answer came, the people would see where it came from. At the time of the evening offering, Elijah stepped forward. His prayer did not resemble the hours of shouting that had filled the day. O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Elijah had confronted Ahab, disappeared at the Lord's direction, returned at the Lord's command, and summoned the nation to Carmel. Now he asked that the relationship governing those actions be made known. The Lord was God in Israel. Elijah was his servant. What had happened was not a display Elijah had designed to elevate himself. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. The fire fell. It consumed the burnt offering. It consumed the wood. It consumed the stones and the dust. Then it licked up the water in the trench. The answer did not merely ignite the sacrifice. It took everything Elijah had placed before the people, including the stones of the repaired altar and the water surrounding it. The drenched offering disappeared in a fire no one at Carmel could attribute to the preparation of human hands. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The silence that had greeted Elijah's first question was gone. Before the test, the people would not say whom they would follow. After the fire, they declared twice who was God. Elijah then commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape." The people seized them. Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon, and there the prophets of Baal were killed. The confrontation ended with more than Baal's failure to answer. The prophetic body supported by the royal house had stood before Israel, called from morning until the evening offering, and received no response. The people who witnessed that failure and the answering fire then acted at Elijah's command against Baal's prophets. But the land was still dry. Fire had answered from above, yet the original judgment remained in place. The people's declaration had identified the Lord as God, but the famine would end only when rain returned. Elijah turned to Ahab. "Go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of the rushing of rain." Ahab went up to eat and drink. Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel. There he bowed himself down upon the earth and placed his face between his knees. The public confrontation had required one prayer before the gathered nation. The return of rain unfolded through repeated watching. Elijah said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." The servant went up and looked. "There is nothing," he said. Elijah sent him again. "Go again." The servant returned to look toward the sea 7 times. Each journey tested the horizon against the promise Elijah had already given Ahab. Elijah had announced the sound of approaching rain before the servant reported any visible sign of it. On the 7th time, the servant came back with a different answer. "Behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea." It was not yet a sky filled with storm clouds. It was one small cloud rising from the direction of the sea, its visible size compared to a man's hand. Elijah treated that small beginning as the signal to act. he told his servant to go to Ahab. Say, "Prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you." Ahab had come to Carmel because Elijah ordered him to gather Israel and the prophets. Now Elijah warned him to leave the mountain before the coming rain made the descent difficult. The change happened quickly. The sky grew black with clouds and wind. A great rain began to fall. The drought that started with Elijah's declaration now broke at the word he had carried back to Israel. Baal's prophets had spent the day calling for an answer and received silence. Elijah had called upon the Lord. Fire had consumed the sacrifice, and after Elijah's repeated prayer on the mountain, the cloud appeared and the rain came. Ahab mounted his chariot and rode toward Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord came upon Elijah. He gathered up his garment and ran ahead of Ahab all the way to the entrance of Jezreel. The day had begun with a divided people and 450 prophets calling upon Baal. It ended with those prophets gone, the people on their faces declaring that the Lord was God, and rain sweeping across a land that had endured years of drought. Ahab did not return to Jezreel alone with a report that the weather had changed. He had watched the entire confrontation. He had heard Elijah challenge Israel, seen Baal's prophets fail, watched fire consume the drenched offering, and heard the people's declaration. Then, after Elijah promised rain, Ahab had seen the small cloud become a darkened sky and a great downpour. The king rode in his chariot while Elijah ran before him under the hand of the Lord. Their movement toward Jezreel placed the prophet who had once vanished from Ahab's reach openly ahead of the royal vehicle. Carmel had answered the question of which voice could respond. The fire had fallen. The rain had returned. Israel had spoken. But the royal conflict was not finished at the mountain. Ahab was returning to a palace where Jezebel still held power. And what had happened to the prophets supported at her table was about to make Elijah the target of a threat more immediate than the search he had already survived. Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Jezebel answered by sending a messenger directly to Elijah. "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." The threat placed a deadline on Elijah's life. The prophets of Baal had been seized and killed. Jezebel swore that within a day Elijah would share their fate. Elijah was afraid. He rose and ran for his life. The prophet who had stood alone before the gathered people at Carmel now left the kingdom. He came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. Then he continued alone for a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down beneath a broom tree and asked that he might die. "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Jezebel had sworn to kill him, but Elijah's response in the wilderness was to ask the Lord to take his life. The man who had prayed for a dead child to live now prayed for his own life to end. Then he lay down beneath the tree and slept. An angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." Elijah looked, and beside his head he found a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank, then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." Elijah rose, ate, and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. His movement had carried him away from Jezreel through Beersheba, across the wilderness, and finally to the mountain. Carmel had been filled with a king, a gathered nation, prophets, an altar, fire, and rain. At Horeb, Elijah entered a cave and stayed there. Then the word of the Lord came to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The question did not ask his name, his location, or what Jezebel had threatened. Elijah answered by describing his loyalty, Israel's actions, and the danger surrounding him. "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts." Then came the charge against the people. The people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. Elijah ended with his own position. I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. At Carmel, Elijah had said that he alone remained as a prophet of the Lord before 450 prophets of Baal. Now, inside the cave at Horeb, he repeated that isolation before God. The covenant had been abandoned, the altars torn down, the prophets killed, and his own life hunted. The Lord told him to go out and stand on the mountain. Behold, the Lord is passing by. A great and powerful wind tore into the mountains and broke rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind came an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came the sound of a low whisper. The signs unfolded with enormous force. Wind shattered rock. The earth shook. Fire followed. Yet each time the distinction remained. The Lord was not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. The fire at Carmel had answered Elijah's prayer in public. The fire at Horeb did not define the presence now addressing him. What drew Elijah from the cave was the low voice that followed. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak. Then he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. A voice came to him again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah gave the same answer. "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." The repeated question brought the repeated complaint into the open after the wind, earthquake, fire, and whisper. Elijah's description of the crisis had not changed. The answer he now received did not release him from the work or leave him at Horeb. "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus." Then the Lord named 3 people through whom the conflict would move forward. "When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria." Hazael was named first, and the kingdom he would rule was Israel's powerful neighbor. "And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel." A new Israelite king was named, while Ahab still occupied the throne, and Jezebel still exercised royal power. "And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place." The third appointment concerned Elijah's own prophetic office. His claim that he stood alone did not lead to the end he had requested beneath the broom tree. Another man was named to continue the mission. The Lord then connected the 3 appointments through judgment. "The one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death." Elijah's work had appeared to contract until only one hunted prophet remained. The answer at Horeb expanded the movement beyond him. A foreign ruler, an Israelite ruler, and a prophet in Elijah's place were all brought within the declared judgment. Then came the answer to Elijah's claim of total isolation. "Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." Elijah had seen the people at Carmel fall on their faces and declare that the Lord was God. He had also seen Jezebel answer the death of Baal's prophets with a threat against him. From inside the cave, he described himself as the only one left. The Lord identified 7,000 in Israel whose knees had not bowed to Baal and whose mouths had not kissed him. The remnant was measured not by public position, but by observable refusal. They had not performed the acts of allegiance given to Baal. Elijah's isolation was real at the cave, but it did not encompass all Israel. The answer to his crisis, therefore, came in 2 forms. There was work still to be done through Hazael, Jehu, and Elisha, and there were 7,000 whose loyalty had not been surrendered to Baal. Elijah left Horeb. He found Elisha son of Shaphat plowing. 12 yoke of oxen were ahead of him, and Elisha was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. The cloak Elijah had wrapped around his face at the sound of the low whisper now fell across the man named as prophet in his place. Elisha left the oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you." Elijah answered, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" Elisha returned from following him. He took the yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He used the equipment of the oxen to boil their flesh, then gave the food to the people, and they ate. The action removed the animals with which he had been working and turned their equipment into fuel. Elisha did not preserve the plowing team for a later return. He gave the prepared meat to the people, then rose, followed Elijah, and served him. The call at Abel-Meholah looked very different from the confrontation at Carmel. Israel was not assembled. A king was not present. Fire did not fall from heaven. Elijah walked past a man at work and placed his cloak upon him. Yet this was the first visible movement of the answer given at Horeb. Elijah had asked for his life to end beneath a broom tree. Instead, he now moved forward with another man following him. The prophetic mission would no longer be carried by Elijah alone. Elisha's first role was service. He followed Elijah rather than immediately replacing him. The relationship began while Ahab remained king, Jezebel remained alive, and the larger commissions named at Horeb still stood over the future. Hazael had been designated for Syria. Jehu had been designated for Israel. Elisha had been designated as prophet in Elijah's place. The next action brought Elijah to Elisha, placed the cloak upon him, and drew him away from the oxen into service. The other two names still waited within the judgment announced at Horeb. For the moment, Elijah and Elisha moved forward together. Behind them stood the plowing equipment burned and the oxen given as food. Ahead of them stood a royal house that had survived the drought, the fire, and the rain without abandoning the conduct Elijah had condemned. Carmel had proved which God could answer. Horeb had shown Elijah that the victory at Carmel had not completed his mission. The next phase would unfold through a relationship, the prophet who had defied the king and the man now called to follow him. Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered his entire army. 32 kings were with him, along with horses and chariots. He went up, surrounded Samaria, and attacked it. From outside the city, Ben-Hadad sent messengers to Ahab with his terms. "Your silver and your gold are mine. Your best wives and children also are mine." Ahab answered, "As you say, my lord the king, I am yours and all that I have." The first demand required Ahab to acknowledge Ben-Hadad's mastery over his wealth and household. Ahab submitted. But Ben-Hadad's messengers returned with a second demand that turned submission into an immediate search and seizure. Thus says Ben-Hadad, "I sent to you saying, 'Deliver to me your silver and your gold, your wives and your children.' Nevertheless, I will send my servants to you tomorrow about this time. They shall search your house and the houses of your servants and lay hands on whatever pleases you most and take it away." Ahab summoned all the elders of the land. "Mark now and see how this man is seeking trouble. He sent to me for my wives and my children, and for my silver and my gold, and I did not refuse him." The elders and all the people told Ahab not to listen and not to consent. Ahab sent Ben-Hadad's messengers back with a carefully divided answer. "Tell my lord the king, all that you first demanded of your servant I will do, but this thing I cannot do." He had accepted the first declaration of ownership. He refused the entry of Syrian servants into his house and the houses of his officials to take whatever they desired. The messengers carried his answer to Ben-Hadad. The Syrian king replied with an oath, "The gods do so to me, and more also, if the dust of Samaria shall suffice for handfuls for all the people who follow me." His meaning was plain. His army was so large, and Samaria's destruction would be so complete that its dust would not provide a handful for each of his men. Ahab answered with a warning, "Let not him who straps on his armor boast himself as he who takes it off." Ben-Hadad was still preparing for battle. He was boasting as though he had already survived it. The reply reached Ben-Hadad while he and the kings were drinking in their tents. He ordered his men, "Take your positions." They positioned themselves against the city. Then a prophet came near to Ahab. "Thus says the Lord, have you seen all this great multitude? Behold, I will give it into your hand this day, and you shall know that I am the Lord." The promise came while Samaria was surrounded by an army supported by 32 kings. Ahab had no basis for claiming that his own strength had created the opportunity. The victory was announced to him before the battle began, and its stated purpose was recognition. Ahab would know who the Lord was. Ahab asked, "By whom?" The prophet answered, "Thus says the Lord, by the servants of the governors of the districts." Ahab asked a second question, "Who shall begin the battle?" "You," the prophet replied. Ahab mustered the servants of the district governors. There were 232 of them. After them he mustered all the people of Israel, 7,000. They went out at noon. Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the tents with the 32 kings who had come to help him. His scouts reported that men were coming out of Samaria. Ben-Hadad ordered, "If they have come out for peace, take them alive, or if they have come out for war, take them alive." Whether the approaching men intended negotiation or combat, Ben-Hadad gave the same command. He expected them to be captured. But the servants of the district governors came out of the city first, with the army following them. Each man struck his opponent. The Syrians fled, and Israel pursued them. Ben-Hadad escaped on a horse with horsemen. Ahab went out and struck the horses and chariots, inflicting a great defeat on the Syrians. The victory answered the promise exactly. The great multitude that surrounded Samaria did not prevail. The small group identified by the prophet led the attack, and Israel's army followed. Ben-Hadad, who had sworn by the dust of the city, fled from it. But the prophet came to Ahab again. "Go, strengthen yourself, and consider well what you have to do, for in the spring the king of Syria will come up against you." The defeat had ended the siege, not the conflict. Ahab was told in advance that Ben-Hadad would return. Ben-Hadad's servants offered their own explanation for what had happened. "Their gods are gods of the hills, and so they were stronger than we. But let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than they." They advised Ben-Hadad to remove the 32 kings from their commands and replace them with appointed officers. Then he should assemble another army equal to the one he had lost, horse for horse and chariot for chariot. The next battle would take place on level ground, where they expected victory. Ben-Hadad listened and followed their plan. When spring came, he mustered the Syrians and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. The Israelites were also mustered and supplied. They went against the Syrians and camped before them. Beside the Syrian force filling the country, the Israelite camps looked like two little flocks of goats. A man of God came near to the king of Israel. "Thus says the Lord, because the Syrians have said the Lord is a God of the hills, but he is not a God of the valleys. Therefore I will give all this great multitude into your hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord." The second victory was promised in answer to the Syrian claim. Ben-Hadad had rebuilt his forces and deliberately changed the location of battle. His servants believed that moving from the hills to the plain would move the fighting beyond the Lord's power. For 7 days, the two armies camped opposite each other. On the 7th day, battle began. The Israelites struck down 100,000 Syrian foot soldiers in one day. The survivors fled into the city of Aphek, and the wall fell upon 27,000 men who remained. Ben-Hadad also fled into the city. He moved from chamber to chamber until he reached an inner room. His servants approached him with a proposal. "We have heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings. Please, let us put sackcloth around our waists and ropes on our heads and go out to the king of Israel. Perhaps he will spare your life." They put sackcloth around their waists and ropes on their heads, went to Ahab and said, "Your servant Ben-Hadad says, 'Please let me live.'" Ahab asked, "Is he still alive?" "He is my brother." The Syrian servants seized on that answer at once. They treated it as a favorable sign and repeated the word. "Yes, your brother Ben-Hadad." Ahab told them, "Go and bring him." Ben-Hadad came out to Ahab, and Ahab brought him up into his chariot. The king who had demanded Ahab's silver, gold, wives, and children now stood before him as a defeated man, asking for life. Ben-Hadad began offering terms. "The cities that my father took from your father I will restore, and you may establish markets for yourself in Damascus, as my father did in Samaria." Ahab answered, "I will let you go on these terms." He made a covenant with Ben-Hadad and released him. The Lord had twice delivered a great Syrian force into Ahab's hand. The second promise had been attached directly to Syria's claim that the Lord's authority ended with the hills. Yet when Ben-Hadad emerged defeated, Ahab called him his brother, negotiated a covenant, and let him leave. The meaning of that decision reached Ahab on his way home. One of the sons of the prophets said to a fellow prophet by the word of the Lord, "Strike me, please." The man refused to strike him. The prophet told him, "Because you have not obeyed the voice of the Lord, behold, as soon as you have gone from me, a lion shall strike you down." When the man departed, a lion met him and killed him. The prophet found another man and said, "Strike me, please." This man struck him and wounded him. The wounded prophet then went and waited for the king beside the road. He disguised himself by placing a bandage over his eyes. As Ahab passed, the prophet called out to him and presented a case. "Your servant went out into the midst of the battle. And behold, a soldier turned and brought a man to me and said, 'Guard this man. If by any means he is missing, your life shall be for his life, or else you shall pay a talent of silver.' And as your servant was busy here and there, he was gone." Ahab answered, "So shall your judgment be. You yourself have decided it." The king ruled that the stated penalty should stand. A guarded man had been allowed to escape, and the person responsible had already named the price of that failure. Then the prophet quickly removed the bandage from his eyes. Ahab recognized him as one of the prophets. The prophet said, "Thus says the Lord, because you have let go out of your hand the man whom I had devoted to destruction, therefore your life shall be for his life, and your people for his people." Ahab's own judgment now returned against him. Ben-Hadad was the man delivered into his hand. Ahab had released him. The penalty was no longer a hypothetical ruling about a missing prisoner. It concerned the king and the people entrusted to him. Ahab went to his house, resentful and sullen. He returned to Samaria, carrying the consequences of the covenant he had made. After these events, another conflict arose, this time not over a besieged city or a captured king, but over a vineyard. Naboth the Jezreelite owned a vineyard in Jezreel beside Ahab's palace. Ahab approached him with an offer. "Give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near my house. I will give you a better vineyard for it, or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money." The offer included either replacement land or payment. Ahab also explained why he wanted this particular property. It was close to his house. Naboth refused. "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." For Naboth, the vineyard was not merely a piece of ground with a market value. It was the inheritance of his fathers, and he placed his refusal before the Lord. Ahab returned to his house resentful and sullen because of Naboth's answer. He lay down on his bed, turned his face away, and would not eat. Jezebel came to him and asked, "Why is your spirit so troubled that you eat no food?" Ahab told her about his conversation with Naboth. "I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, Or else, if it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it." And he answered, "I will not give you my vineyard." In Ahab's retelling, Naboth's appeal to the Lord and to his ancestral inheritance disappeared. What remained was the king's offer and Naboth's refusal. Jezebel answered, "Do you now govern Israel? Arise and eat bread, and let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." She then acted through Ahab's royal authority. Jezebel wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal. She sent the letters to the elders and leaders who lived in Naboth's city. Her instructions laid out the entire procedure. Proclaim a fast and set Naboth at the head of the people. Set 2 worthless men opposite him and let them bring a charge against him, saying, "You have cursed God and the king." Then take him out and stone him to death. The elders and leaders of Naboth's city did exactly what Jezebel had written. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth at the head of the people. 2 worthless men came in and sat opposite him. Before the people, they testified against Naboth. Naboth cursed God and the king. The required accusation came from 2 witnesses, just as Jezebel had directed. The men of the city then took Naboth outside and stoned him to death. When it was done, they sent word to Jezebel, "Naboth has been stoned. He is dead." Jezebel went to Ahab with the result, "Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive, but dead." Ahab heard that Naboth was dead. He rose and went down to the vineyard to take possession of it. The king had wanted the ground because it lay beside his house. Naboth had refused because it was the inheritance of his fathers. Jezebel used Ahab's name, Ahab's seal, the officials of Naboth's city, a public accusation, 2 false witnesses, and execution by stoning to remove the owner. Now Ahab entered the vineyard as the beneficiary of everything done in his authority. Ben-Hadad had been delivered into his hand, and Ahab had let him go. Naboth had refused to place his inheritance in that same hand, and Naboth had been killed. The vineyard now belonged to the king, but Naboth's blood had not disappeared from the ground Ahab came to possess, and the prophet who had condemned the royal house before was about to meet him there. The word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Arise, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone to take possession." Elijah was told exactly where to find the king and what to say. "Have you killed and also taken possession?" The question joined the murder to its benefit. Ahab had not thrown the stones, but he had gone down to claim the property produced by Naboth's death. Then came the sentence, "In the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick your own blood." Elijah entered the vineyard and found Ahab there. Ahab said, "Have you found me, O my enemy?" Elijah answered, "I have found you, because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord." The king called Elijah his enemy, but Elijah again placed the conflict beneath a higher judgment. He had not come because of a personal struggle over land. He had come because Ahab had given himself to evil. "Behold, I will bring disaster upon you. I will utterly sweep you away, and will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel." Ahab's house would be made like the house of Jeroboam son of Nebat, and the house of Baasha son of Ahijah. Both earlier dynasties had been removed. Ahab had provoked the Lord and caused Israel to sin, and his royal house would meet the same destruction. Elijah then spoke specifically about Jezebel. "The dogs shall eat Jezebel within the walls of Jezreel." Any member of Ahab's house who died in the city would be eaten by dogs. Anyone who died in the open country would be eaten by birds. The sentence reached beyond Ahab's own death. His dynasty, Jezebel, and the fate of those belonging to his house were all included. The vineyard he came to possess had become the place where the destruction of his family was pronounced. Ahab had set himself apart through the extent of his conduct. He sold himself to do evil, urged on by Jezebel his wife. He acted abominably by pursuing idols, following the practices of the Amorites, whom the Lord had driven out before Israel. When Ahab heard Elijah's words, he tore his clothes. He put sackcloth on his body and fasted. He lay in sackcloth and moved about dejectedly. The king, who had gone down to take possession of Naboth's vineyard, left under a sentence against everything attached to his house. His response was visible and sustained: torn clothing, sackcloth, fasting, and subdued movement. The word of the Lord came to Elijah again. Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because Ahab had humbled himself, the announced disaster would not come during his own days. It would come upon his house during the days of his son. The judgment was postponed, not withdrawn. Ahab would still die, and his own blood had already been named. But the destruction of the dynasty would wait for the next generation. 3 years passed without war between Syria and Israel. In the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, came down to visit Ahab. Ahab spoke to his servants about a city still held by Syria. Do you know that Ramoth-Gilead belongs to us, and we keep quiet, and do not take it out of the hand of the king of Syria? Then Ahab asked Jehoshaphat, will you go with me to battle at Ramoth-Gilead? Jehoshaphat answered, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. The king of Judah agreed to join the campaign, but he added a condition. Inquire first for the word of the Lord. Ahab gathered about 400 prophets and asked them, shall I go to battle against Ramoth-Gilead, or shall I refrain? They answered together, go up, for the Lord will give it into the hand of the king. Their answer gave Ahab exactly what he wanted: permission to march and assurance of victory. Jehoshaphat was not satisfied. Is there not here another prophet of the Lord of whom we may inquire? Ahab knew of one. There is yet one man by whom we may inquire of the Lord, Micaiah son of Imlah, but I hate him, for he never prophesies good concerning me, but evil. Jehoshaphat replied, let not the king say so. Ahab called an officer and ordered him to bring Micaiah quickly. The 2 kings sat on their thrones at the entrance of Samaria's gate. They wore their royal robes, and the prophets spoke before them on the threshing floor. One prophet, Zedekiah son of Chenaanah, had made iron horns. He held them before the kings and declared, thus says the Lord, with these you shall push the Syrians until they are destroyed. All the prophets gave the same assurance. Go up to Ramoth-Gilead and triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. The royal setting displayed complete agreement. 2 kings sat in their robes. Iron horns gave the promise a visible form. Hundreds of prophetic voices pointed toward victory. Meanwhile, the messenger sent to bring Micaiah tried to secure one more agreeing voice. Behold, the words of the prophets with one accord are favorable to the king. Let your word be like the word of one of them, and speak favorably. Micaiah answered, as the Lord lives, what the Lord says to me, that I will speak. When he arrived, Ahab put the same question to him. Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain? Micaiah answered, go up and triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. His words matched the assurance already given by the others, but Ahab did not accept the answer. How many times shall I make you swear that you speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? Micaiah then described what he had seen. I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. The Lord said, these have no master. Let each return to his home in peace. The promised victory disappeared. Israel would be scattered, not because the people were destroyed, but because their master was gone. Each person could return home in peace, because the king leading them into battle would no longer lead them. Ahab turned to Jehoshaphat. "Did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil?" Ahab recognized the unfavorable message he expected from Micaiah. The warning did not change his decision. Micaiah continued, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord." He had seen the Lord sitting on his throne, with all the host of heaven standing beside him, on his right and on his left. The Lord asked, "Who will entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead?" Different answers were offered. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord. "I will entice him." The Lord asked, "By what means?" The spirit answered, "I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." The Lord said, "You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so." Micaiah brought the vision directly into the scene before the gate. "Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster for you." The agreement of the 400 prophets was not evidence that Ahab's campaign would succeed. Their unified promise of victory was the means by which he was being drawn toward the place of his fall. Zedekiah, son of Chenaanah, stepped forward and struck Micaiah on the cheek. "How did the Spirit of the Lord go from me to speak to you?" Micaiah answered, "Behold, you shall see on that day when you go into an inner chamber to hide yourself." Ahab then ordered that Micaiah be seized and taken to Amon, governor of the city, and to Joash, the king's son. "Say, thus says the king, put this fellow in prison and feed him meager rations of bread and water until I come in peace." The sentence depended on Ahab's return. If he came back safely, Micaiah would remain imprisoned until the king could deal with him as a false prophet. Micaiah answered, "If you return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me." Then he called for everyone to hear his warning. Ahab and Jehoshaphat went up to Ramoth-Gilead. Before the battle, Ahab told Jehoshaphat, "I will disguise myself and go into battle, but you wear your robes." Ahab concealed his royal identity. Jehoshaphat entered the fighting dressed as a king. The king of Syria had given orders to his 32 chariot commanders, "Fight with neither small nor great, but only with the king of Israel." Their assignment was focused entirely on Ahab. When the commanders saw Jehoshaphat in his royal robes, they believed he was the king of Israel and turned to fight against him. Jehoshaphat cried out. The chariot commanders realized he was not Ahab and turned away from pursuing him. Ahab's disguise had succeeded in hiding him from the men specifically ordered to find him. The Syrian commanders did not identify him, yet a man drew his bow without selecting Ahab as his target and released an arrow. The arrow struck Ahab between the sections of his armor. Ahab told the driver of his chariot, "Turn around and carry me out of the battle, for I am wounded." The fighting grew fierce that day. Ahab was propped up in his chariot facing the Syrians, while blood from his wound flowed into the bottom of the chariot. He remained there until evening. At sunset, he died. A cry passed through the army, "Every man to his city and every man to his country." Micaiah's vision had been fulfilled. Israel was released to go home because its master was dead. Ahab's body was brought to Samaria and buried there. His chariot was washed beside the pool of Samaria. Dogs licked his blood while prostitutes washed themselves there, according to the word the Lord had spoken. The king had entered the battle disguised, surrounded by predictions of victory, and protected from direct recognition by the Syrian chariot commanders. None of those measures altered the sentence carried into battle. An unselected arrow found the opening in his armor, his blood filled the chariot, and he died before he could return in peace. Micaiah remained the prophet whose warning stood. The hundreds who promised victory had drawn Ahab toward his fall. The king's order that Micaiah receive bread and water until his peaceful return rested on a return that never happened. Ahab's reign ended, but the larger sentence pronounced in Naboth's vineyard did not end with him. His other works included the ivory house he built and the cities he established, but royal construction could not preserve the man beneath the armor or reverse the judgment attached to Naboth's blood. Ahab died and was buried. His son Ahaziah reigned in his place. The humiliation that had postponed disaster now defined the unfinished boundary. The destruction of Ahab's house had been assigned to his son's days. Jezebel still stood under the sentence Elijah had spoken, and the dynasty continued for the moment under another king. Ahab was gone. The house he built remained, and so did the word that promised its fall. During the reigns that had overlapped Ahab's rule, Jehoshaphat governed Judah from Jerusalem. He had become king at the age of 35 and reigned for 25 years. His mother was Azubah, daughter of Shilhi. Jehoshaphat followed the way of his father Asa and did what was right in the sight of the Lord. He removed from Judah the remaining male cult prostitutes who had continued from his father's reign. The high places, however, were not taken away, and the people continued to sacrifice and burn incense there. He also made peace with the king of Israel. That peace had placed him beside Ahab at Ramoth-Gilead, where he entered the battle wearing royal robes and escaped the Syrian chariot commanders who mistook him for their target. But Jehoshaphat's rule extended beyond that alliance. He exercised power in war, and Edom was governed without its own king by an appointed deputy. Jehoshaphat built ships intended to sail to Ophir for gold. They never made the voyage because they were wrecked at Etzion-Geber. Ahaziah, son of Ahab, offered to send his servants with Jehoshaphat's servants in the ships, but Jehoshaphat refused. When Jehoshaphat died, he was buried with his fathers in the city of David. His son Jehoram became king of Judah in his place. In Israel, Ahaziah inherited Ahab's throne during Jehoshaphat's reign and ruled for 2 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He followed the way of his father, the way of his mother, and the way of Jeroboam son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin. Ahaziah served Baal and worshipped him, provoking the Lord, the God of Israel, as his father had done. The transfer of royal power from Ahab to his son therefore brought no change in the allegiance Elijah had confronted. Ahab was dead, but the worship supported by his house continued under Ahaziah. After Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. Then Ahaziah fell through the lattice of his upper chamber in Samaria and was injured. From his bed he sent messengers with an order. "Go, inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this sickness." The king of Israel did not send to Elijah or seek an answer from the Lord. He directed his messengers outside Israel to inquire of the god worshipped at Ekron. But the angel of the Lord spoke to Elijah the Tishbite. "Arise, go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria, and say to them, 'Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron?'" Then Elijah was given the answer to the question Ahaziah had sent his messengers to ask. "Now therefore thus says the Lord, you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die." Elijah went to meet the messengers. They had left Samaria under the king's command, expecting to travel to Ekron and return with an answer from Baal-zebub. Elijah stopped that journey before they reached its destination. He did not redirect them toward another shrine or require them to complete a different search. He gave them the Lord's judgment and sent them back to the king. When the messengers returned earlier than Ahaziah expected, he asked, "Why have you returned?" They answered, "A man came up to meet us." Then they repeated the message. "Go back to the king who sent you and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, is it because there is no God in Israel that you are sending to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die.'" Ahaziah asked them, "What kind of man was he who came up to meet you and told you these things?" They described him as a man wearing a garment of hair with a leather belt around his waist. The king recognized the description. It is Elijah the Tishbite. Hazael now knew who had intercepted his messengers. The prophet who had confronted his father had appeared during his own injury and pronounced his death. The king responded by sending a captain with 50 men to Elijah. They found Elijah sitting on the top of a hill. The captain went up to him and delivered the royal command. "O man of God," the king says, "come down." The title acknowledged Elijah as a man of God, but the order placed the king's authority first. Hazael summoned Elijah as though the prophet could be brought from the hill by a military detachment. "Elijah," answered the captain, "if I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. Fire came down from heaven and consumed the captain and his 50 men. The king sent another captain with another 50. The second captain went to Elijah and made the demand more urgent. "O man of God, this is the king's order. Come down quickly." Elijah answered him in the same terms. "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. The fire of God came down from heaven and consumed the second captain and his 50 men. At Carmel, fire had fallen before the people to answer the question of who was God. Here fire answered a royal attempt to place the man of God under the king's command. Hazael had been told that his appeal to Beelzebub treated Israel as though it had no God. Two captains then called Elijah a man of God while demanding that he submit to the authority of the king who had sent that appeal. Hazael sent a third captain with 50 men. This captain went up the hill, but he did not repeat the demand made by the first two. He came and fell on his knees before Elijah. "O man of God, please let my life and the life of these 50 servants of yours be precious in your sight." He acknowledged what had happened to the earlier detachments. Behold, fire came down from heaven and consumed the two former captains of 50 men with their 50s. "But now let my life be precious in your sight." The third captain did not command Elijah to come down. He petitioned him for the lives of himself and his men. His words placed the fate of the previous captains before Elijah and asked for a different outcome. Then the angel of the Lord spoke to Elijah. "Go down with him. Do not be afraid of him." Elijah rose and went down with the captain to the king. Hazael had tried to send men beyond Israel to obtain an answer from Baal-zebub. Elijah intercepted them. Hazael then sent armed detachments to bring Elijah to him. The first two were destroyed. The third approached in humility, and Elijah received a direct command to descend with him. Now the prophet stood before Ahab's son. Elijah said, "Thus says the Lord, because you have sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, is it because there is no God in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die." The judgment remained exactly what it had been when Elijah first met the messengers. The soldiers had not changed it. The destruction of the two detachments had not enlarged it. The humility of the third captain had preserved the lives of his men, but it did not reverse the sentence against the king. Hazael's decisive action had been identified each time the message was given. He sent to inquire of Baal-zebub rather than seek the word of the God of Israel. The contrast was now visible within the king's own response. He had enough confidence in Elijah's identity to send soldiers after him, but he had sent his original inquiry to Ekron. He recognized the prophet from a description, yet he had not treated the God whose word Elijah carried as the one from whom his recovery should be sought. Elijah's presence beside the royal bed removed every layer between Hazael and the judgment. The king no longer heard through messengers who had been stopped on the road. The prophet himself delivered the sentence, face to face. Hazael died, according to the word of the Lord that Elijah had spoken. He had no son. Jehoram became king in his place during the reign of Jehoram son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. The throne of Israel therefore passed again within Ahab's house, but not from father to son. Ahaziah's injury had begun with a question about whether he would recover. The answer came before his messengers reached Ekron, remained unchanged through 3 military deployments, and was fulfilled when he died without an heir. His other acts belonged to his brief reign, but the confrontation that defined its end had exposed the same conflict Elijah had faced under Ahab. Royal authority could dispatch messengers and soldiers. It could order a prophet to descend from a hill. It could not force Baal-zebub to provide the future, and it could not prevent the word delivered by Elijah from coming to pass. The third captain had understood enough to change his approach. He saw what had happened to the first 100 men and placed his own life and the lives of his 50 before Elijah as precious. He was spared. Ahaziah heard the same warning repeatedly and remained under it until his death. Ahab's immediate successor was now gone. The sentence against Ahaziah had been completed, but the larger judgment spoken in Naboth's vineyard still extended across the royal house. Ahab's dynasty continued under Jehoram, and Jezebel's appointed fate remained ahead. Elijah too remained. He had called Elisha and received him into service, but the cloak had not yet passed fully from one prophet to the other. The man who had announced drought, called down fire at Carmel, fled to Horeb, and confronted 2 kings of Ahab's house, was approaching a departure unlike the deaths he had pronounced. Before that departure, Elijah and Elisha would travel together, and every step of their journey would reveal that the younger prophet already knew his master was about to be taken from him. The journey began when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah and Elisha set out from Gilgal. Elijah said, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." Elisha answered with an oath, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the 2 men went down to Bethel together. The sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha. "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" Elisha answered, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." The approaching separation was not hidden from Elisha or from the prophetic community at Bethel. They knew what the Lord was about to do, but Elisha did not turn that knowledge into a public discussion. He acknowledged it and continued beside Elijah. At Bethel, Elijah repeated the instruction, "Elisha, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." Elisha gave the same answer, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." They went on to Jericho. The sons of the prophets at Jericho approached Elisha with the same question, "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" Elisha replied, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." At each location, Elijah offered Elisha a place to remain. At each location, Elisha refused to leave. His oath joined the life of the Lord to the life of the master he continued to follow. The destination changed from Bethel to Jericho, but his response did not. Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." For the 3rd time, Elisha answered, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." The 2 of them continued together. 50 men from the sons of the prophets followed and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha stopped beside the Jordan. The journey that began with the 2 prophets now had witnesses. The 50 men did not cross with them, but they watched from the opposite position as Elijah and Elisha reached the river. Elijah took off his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water. The water divided to one side and the other. Elijah and Elisha crossed on dry ground. The cloak that had been thrown over Elisha when he was called from the plowing oxen now opened a path through the Jordan in Elijah's hand. The 2 prophets left the watching community behind and crossed together. When they reached the other side, Elijah spoke to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha had refused 3 opportunities to remain behind. Now Elijah invited him to name what he wanted before the separation both men knew was coming. Elisha answered, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." A double portion was not a request for Elijah's cloak as an object or for a position granted by public vote. Elisha asked for a share in the spirit at work through his master, and he asked for the portion associated with the principal heir. Elijah replied, "You have asked a hard thing." Then he gave Elisha a sign by which the answer would be known. "If you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so." The outcome would be tied to whether Elisha witnessed the moment of departure. He could not cause that moment, and Elijah did not promise to produce it. Elisha's part was to remain and see. The 2 men continued walking and talking. Then a chariot of fire and horses of fire came between them and separated one from the other. Elijah went up into heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw it. My father, he cried, "the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." The language placed Elijah's significance beside the military strength by which a kingdom defended itself. Kings had chariots and horsemen. Elisha watched a fiery chariot and fiery horses separate him from the prophet whose word had repeatedly determined the fate of kings. Elisha saw Elijah no more. He grasped his own clothes and tore them in 2 pieces. The master he had refused to leave was gone. Elisha had crossed the Jordan beside him, heard the condition attached to his request, and witnessed the departure. Now the visible proof of their relationship lay on the ground. Elisha picked up Elijah's cloak, which had fallen from him. He returned and stood on the bank of the Jordan. The 50 men remained on the other side, but Elijah was no longer beside Elisha to roll the cloak or strike the river. The first action with the fallen mantle would reveal whether the younger prophet had received more than a garment. Elisha took the cloak and struck the water. Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? When he struck the water, it divided to one side and the other. Elisha crossed over. The same river that opened for Elijah now opened for Elisha. The passage demonstrated that the God of Elijah was not gone with Elijah. Elisha returned alone by the path the 2 men had crossed together. The sons of the prophets at Jericho saw him from their position opposite the river. "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," they said. They went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. Their recognition did not depend only on the cloak hanging from Elisha's shoulders. They had watched him strike the Jordan, seen the water divide, and watched him cross. The sign that first marked Elijah's passage now marked Elisha's return, but the sons of the prophets still wanted to search for Elijah. "Behold now, there are with your servants 50 strong men. Please let them go and seek your master. It may be that the Spirit of the Lord has caught him up and cast him upon some mountain or into some valley." Elisha answered, "You shall not send." They continued urging him until he was embarrassed by their insistence. Then he said, "Send." The 50 men went out and searched for 3 days. They did not find Elijah. They returned to Elisha while he remained at Jericho. Elisha said, "Did I not say to you, do not go?" The search confirmed what Elisha's own sight had already established. The Spirit had not merely carried Elijah to another place where strong men could retrieve him. Elisha had watched him go up in the whirlwind, and the 3-day search found no mountain or valley where he could be recovered. The prophetic community now stood before the man who possessed Elijah's cloak, had crossed Elijah's river, and had correctly told them not to search. The people of Jericho then brought Elisha a different problem. "Behold, the location of this city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad, and the land is unfruitful." They addressed Elisha as their Lord and placed the condition before his own observation. The setting of the city was pleasant, but the water source produced death and loss. Elisha said, "Bring me a new bowl and put salt in it." They brought it to him. He went to the spring of the water, threw the salt into it, and declared, "Thus says the Lord, I have healed this water. From now on, neither death nor miscarriage shall come from it." The healing was attached to the word Elisha spoke in the Lord's name. The new bowl and salt were visible in his action, but the declaration identified the source of the change. The water was healed according to Elisha's word. His first public act after returning across the Jordan brought life to a community's damaged source. Elijah's ministry had begun with water being withheld from the land. Elisha's independent work began with water being healed for a city. The two acts were different, but the authority recognized by the sons of the prophets was now active beyond their own community. Jericho's residents saw the condition of their spring reversed through the word spoken by the man who had returned in Elijah's cloak. From Jericho, Elisha went up toward Bethel. As he was going up on the way, a group of youths came out of the city and mocked him. "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" Elisha turned around and looked at them. Then he pronounced a curse upon them in the name of the Lord. 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the youths. The judgment was immediate and severe. The youths had come out from Bethel, directed their contempt at Elisha, and repeated the command for him to go up. Elisha did not summon the bears by his own name. He cursed them in the name of the Lord, and 42 were struck. The movement from Jericho to Bethel placed 2 sharply different events beside each other. At Jericho, people approached Elisha with a damaged water supply, acknowledged him as Lord, and received healing. On the road from Bethel, the youths approached him with mockery and met judgment. Together, the 2 encounters established that the authority resting on Elisha could not be reduced to producing wonders on request. The word he carried gave life at the spring and brought punishment on the road. Elisha continued from Bethel to Mount Carmel. From there, he returned to Samaria. His route carried him back through places connected with Elijah's work and their final journey. Bethel had been one of the prophetic communities where Elisha was warned that his master would be taken. Carmel was the mountain where Elijah had stood before Israel. Samaria was the royal center from which Ahab and Ahaziah had ruled. But Elisha did not return as the servant walking behind Elijah. He returned as the prophet recognized by the sons of the prophets, carrying the cloak that had opened the Jordan in his own hand. The transfer had been tested at every boundary. Elisha knew Elijah would be taken, yet he refused to leave him at Gilgal, Bethel, or Jericho. He crossed the Jordan beside him. He asked for the double portion. He saw the fiery chariot and horses, watched Elijah rise in the whirlwind, and received the sign Elijah had given him. Then the evidence moved outward. The Jordan divided. The prophetic community recognized the spirit resting upon him. The failed search ended the attempt to recover Elijah. Jericho's water was healed. The mockery near Bethel met judgment. By the time Elisha returned to Samaria, the mantle was no longer only the sign of his private call from the plowing field. It marked an office exercised before witnesses and confirmed through action. Elijah's departure also changed the shape of the unfinished work from Horeb. 3 names had been given there. Elisha had now taken his place as prophet. Hazael and Jehu had been designated for kingship, and the judgment connected with them still stood over Ahab's house and Israel's conflict with Syria. Elisha possessed the requested portion, but possession would now become responsibility. Elijah had faced kings, famine, royal violence, and national apostasy. Elisha would be approached by kings and widows, commanders and servants, prophetic communities and foreign armies. For now, he had returned to Samaria alone. The man who once poured water on Elijah's hands now carried Elijah's cloak and the kingdom before him was already moving toward a war in which three kings would discover that the prophet they needed was the successor they had not yet learned to understand. Jehoram, son of Ahab, became king over Israel in Samaria during the 18th year of Jehoshaphat's reign in Judah. He ruled for 12 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, though not in the same way as his father and mother. He removed the pillar of Baal that his father had made. But he continued in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin, and he did not turn away from them. The change was real, but limited. The Baal pillar associated with Ahab was removed. The established practices of Jeroboam remained. Moab's rebellion now became Jehoram's first major military crisis. Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep breeder. He had been required to deliver to the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. After Ahab died, Mesha rebelled against Israel. Jehoram went out from Samaria and mustered all Israel. Then he sent word to Jehoshaphat, "The king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you go with me to battle against Moab?" Jehoshaphat gave the same pledge of alliance he had once given Ahab. "I will go. I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." Jehoram asked, "By which way shall we march?" Jehoshaphat answered, "By the way of the wilderness of Edom." The king of Israel, the king of Judah, and the king of Edom set out together. Their route curved through the wilderness. After 7 days of marching, the army had no water, and neither did the animals following them. The campaign against Moab had stalled before the allied kings reached their intended battle. 3 royal armies had been assembled, but the wilderness route placed soldiers and animals under a need military strength could not solve. Jehoram cried out, "Alas! The Lord has called these 3 kings to give them into the hand of Moab." He interpreted the shortage as the means by which the allied kings would be delivered to their enemy. Jehoshaphat asked a different question. "Is there no prophet of the Lord here through whom we may inquire of the Lord?" One of Jehoram's servants answered, "Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here, who poured water on the hands of Elijah." The servant identified Elisha through his service to the prophet who had been taken. Before the cloak fell to him, Elisha had attended Elijah closely enough to be known as the man who poured water on his hands. Jehoshaphat responded, "The word of the Lord is with him." The king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, and the king of Edom went down to Elisha. The movement reversed their positions. Elisha was not summoned before royal thrones at a city gate. 3 kings came down to him because their army had no water, and Jehoshaphat recognized that the word of the Lord was with Elijah's successor. Elisha addressed Jehoram, "What have I to do with you? Go to the prophets of your father and to the prophets of your mother." The removal of Ahab's Baal pillar had not erased the royal history standing behind Jehoram. Elisha directed him toward the prophets associated with the father and mother, whose ways still defined the house. Jehoram answered, "No, it is the Lord who has called these 3 kings to give them into the hand of Moab." The king repeated his conclusion about the crisis. He did not appeal to the prophets of Ahab and Jezebel. He stood before Elisha insisting that the Lord had brought the kings together for destruction. Elisha replied with an oath, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, were it not that I have regard for Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, I would neither look at you nor see you." These were the words Elijah had used to define his own position before Ahab. The Lord lived, and the prophet stood before him. Elisha now used that same declaration before Ahab's son. He also separated the kings in front of him. Jehoram's crown did not secure Elisha's attention. Jehoshaphat's presence did. Then Elisha said, "Bring me a musician." A musician was brought. As the musician played, the hand of the Lord came upon Elisha. He announced the instruction first. "Thus says the Lord, make this valley full of trenches. The army that lacked water was told to cut channels throughout the dry valley. Then came the promise. You shall not see wind or rain, but this valley shall be filled with water so that you shall drink, you, your livestock, and your animals. The water would not arrive through a storm the kings could watch approaching. They would see neither wind nor rain, yet the valley would fill, and the provision would meet the need of both the army and the animals. Elisha continued, "This is a light thing in the sight of the Lord. He will also give the Moabites into your hand." The kings had come because the absence of water threatened the campaign. Elisha answered the shortage, then placed it within a larger victory. Water would sustain them, and Moab would be delivered to them. "You shall attack every fortified city and every choice city, and shall fell every good tree and stop up all springs of water and ruin every good piece of land with stones." The instructions described a campaign that would continue beyond a single battlefield. Moab's cities, trees, springs, and productive ground would all be struck. The next morning, about the time of the morning offering, water came from the direction of Edom. The country filled with water. No wind had appeared, no rain had fallen before the armies. The trenches prepared in obedience to Elisha's word now held the water soldiers and animals required. Across from them, the Moabites had heard that the kings had come to fight. Every man able to put on armor, from the youngest upward, had been called out. They stood along the border. When the Moabites rose early in the morning, the sun shone upon the water. From their side, it appeared red like blood. "This is blood," they said. "The kings have surely fought together and struck one another down. Now then, Moab, to the spoil." The water that preserved the allied armies created a false conclusion in the opposing camp. The Moabites did not approach expecting an organized force. They believed the kings had destroyed one another and that the camp was ready to be plundered. They came toward the camp of Israel. The Israelites rose and struck the Moabites. Moab fled before them, and the allied forces entered the land, striking as they went. They destroyed the cities. On every good piece of land, each man threw a stone until the ground was covered. They stopped every spring and felled every good tree. The actions matched the campaign Elisha had announced. The army that had nearly failed for lack of water now stopped Moab's water sources. The men who had found themselves in an empty valley filled that land with stones. Only the stones of Kir-Hareseth remained. Slingers surrounded the city and attacked it. Mesha saw that the battle was going against him. He took 700 swordsmen and tried to break through toward the king of Edom. They could not break through. Mesha then took his eldest son, the son who was to reign in his place, and offered him as a burnt offering upon the wall. Great wrath came against Israel. The allied forces withdrew from Mesha and returned to their own land. The campaign therefore ended with a sharp and disturbing reversal. Elisha's promises had been fulfilled. The valley filled with water. The Moabites were delivered into the allies' hand. Their cities and land were struck, and Kir-Hareseth was surrounded. Yet after Mesha sacrificed his heir on the wall, and great wrath came against Israel, the kings did not complete the capture. They turned away and went home. No explanation given by the kings can settle the nature of that wrath. The secure movement is the one visible in the sequence. The sacrifice was offered, great wrath came against Israel, and the allies withdrew. Jehoram had begun the crisis by declaring that the Lord had gathered 3 kings to hand them over to Moab. That did not happen. Their army received water without wind or rain. Moab misread the water as blood and entered the camp expecting spoil. Israel rose, defeated them, and carried the assault into their land. But Jehoram's campaign also did not finish as a clean conquest. The 3 kings returned after an event that left Mesha in his city and the allies moving away from him. For Elisha, the encounter established his place before royal power without making him an agent of the king of Israel. Jehoram came to him because there was no water. Elisha openly rejected the king's claim upon him and acted with regard for Jehoshaphat. The resulting word determined what the armies were to do, how water would come, and what would happen when Moab attacked. The king of Israel had removed his father's pillar of Baal, but Elisha still directed him toward the prophets of his father and mother. A partial change in royal practice had not created a relationship of trust between them. Jehoshaphat's presence made the difference in the immediate encounter. Because Elisha regarded him, the three kings received an answer. That answer preserved every soldier and animal able to drink from the water that filled the valley, and it turned the allied force from a stranded army into an invading one. The public scale was enormous. 3 kingdoms, mustered armies, a 7-day march, a waterless valley, a border force, ruined cities, and a royal heir offered on a wall. Elisha's first appearance before kings showed that the spirit resting upon him could shape the movement of nations. Yet his authority was not measured by whether a campaign ended with territory in Israel's hands. Elisha spoke what he was given, the promised water came, and the military word was fulfilled. The kings still made their own movements, and the Moab campaign ended with withdrawal. The armies dispersed toward their own lands. The royal crisis that had brought 3 kings down to Elisha was over. But away from kings and battlefields, another need was already pressing toward the prophet. It belonged to a widow whose husband had served among the prophets, a creditor preparing to take her sons, and a household with nothing left except one small jar of oil. The widow cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. But the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." Her husband had belonged to the sons of the prophets. His death had left a debt, and the creditor was now moving against the only people she still had with her. The threatened payment was not an object she could replace. It was both of her children. Elisha asked, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She answered, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." The solution began with the single item she still possessed. Elisha said, "Go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels and not too few. Then go in and shut the door behind yourself and your sons. Pour into all these vessels, and when one is full, set it aside." The widow left him and followed the instructions. She borrowed the empty containers, went inside with her sons and shut the door. Her sons brought the vessels to her, and she poured. The oil from her small jar continued to flow as one vessel filled and was set aside. Then another was brought. The work belonged to the household under threat. The mother poured, the sons carried, and the borrowed containers received what their own house had lacked. When the vessels were full, she said to one of her sons, "Bring me another vessel." He answered, "There is not another." Then the oil stopped flowing. Its limit was not the amount originally visible in the jar. The oil continued until every vessel gathered in obedience to Elisha's instruction had been filled. It stopped when there was no empty container left to receive it. The widow went and told the man of God what had happened. Elisha said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on the rest." The multiplying oil answered both parts of the crisis. The sale would satisfy the creditor, preventing her sons from being taken, and the remaining value would support the family afterward. Elisha did not take the oil or claim a share of its value. The provision remained with the widow, whose house had supplied the one jar and whose sons had carried the vessels. What began as her final possession became the means by which she could pay what was owed and keep her household together. Elisha's work then brought him regularly through Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to eat some food. After that, whenever he passed through Shunem, he stopped there to eat. The woman spoke to her husband, "Behold, now I know that this is a holy man of God who is continually passing our way." She proposed that they create a place for him, Let us make a small room on the roof with walls, and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that whenever he comes to us, he can go in there." Her husband agreed, and the room was prepared. It gave Elisha a settled place within the household whenever his journeys brought him through the town. The furnishings were simple and complete: somewhere to sleep, somewhere to sit, a table, and a lamp. One day Elisha came to the house, went up to the room and lay down there. He told his servant Gehazi, "Call this Shunammite." Gehazi called her, and she stood before Elisha. Elisha had Gehazi ask her, "See, you have taken all this trouble for us. What can be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army?" The woman had used her own place and resources to receive Elisha. He offered to use his access to royal or military authority on her behalf. She answered, "I dwell among my own people." She requested no intervention from the king and no assistance from the army commander. After she left, Elisha asked Gehazi, "What then is to be done for her?" Gehazi answered, "She has no son and her husband is old." Elisha told him to call her again. When she returned, she stood in the doorway of the room she had prepared for him. Elisha said, "At this season, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son." The promise reached into the need she had not presented as a request. She replied, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not deceive your servant." The woman who had declined an offer of royal assistance now resisted a promise that exceeded anything a king or army commander could arrange. Yet at the appointed time, she conceived and gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. The child grew. One day he went out to his father among the reapers. My head," he cried. His father told a servant, "Carry him to his mother." The servant picked him up and brought him to her. The boy sat on his mother's lap until noon. Then he died. The promised son had lived long enough to go out to his father at work and speak his pain. Now the woman held the child without life, just as the widow of Zarephath had once held her son before Elijah. She carried him upstairs and laid him on the bed of the man of God. Then she shut the door behind him and went out. The room she had built for Elisha now held the body of the son he had promised. She called her husband and said, "Send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again." Her husband asked, "Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." She answered, "All is well." Then she saddled the donkey and told her servant, "Urge the animal on. Do not slow down for me unless I tell you." She set out for Elisha at Mount Carmel. The distance did not change her direction. She had placed her son on Elisha's bed, closed the door, and gone straight toward the man who had announced his birth. Elisha saw her approaching from a distance. He said to Gehazi, "Look, there is the Shunammite. Run at once to meet her and say to her, 'Is all well with you? Is all well with your husband? Is all well with the child?'" Gehazi ran to her and asked the three questions. She answered, "All is well." She did not stop with Gehazi. She continued until she reached Elisha on the mountain. Then she caught hold of his feet. Gehazi came near to push her away, but Elisha stopped him. "Leave her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." Elisha knew the distress was severe, but he did not yet know its cause. The woman who had once stood in the doorway while he promised her a son now held his feet while the child lay dead in the room she had built.
"I beg you, reconsider.
She spoke.
Do not let the storm
"Did I
deceive
ask my
you.
Lord for a
The altar
son?
must
Did I
stand
not
as you
say,
commanded."
'Do not deceive me'?" She did not need to tell Elisha every event that had occurred. Her words carried him back to the promise she had resisted. The son had not come from her request. Elisha had announced him. Now the loss of that child had made the original warning, "Do not deceive me," the center of her appeal. Elisha turned immediately to Gehazi. "Tie up your garment and take my staff in your hand and go." If you meet anyone, do not greet him, and if anyone greets you, do not reply. Lay my staff on the face of the child." The urgency of the command allowed no interruption along the way. Gehazi was to carry Elisha's staff directly to the room and place it upon the boy.
Where you go,
But the
I will
child's
go.
mother would not leave
Your
Elisha.
people shall be my people,
"As the
and
Lord
your
lives,
God, my God.
and as you
I will
yourself
not leave
live,
you."
I will not leave you."
The altar is near, and
Her
the storm
oath repeated the words
gathers.
Elisha had used when Elijah told him to remain behind at Gilgal, Bethel, and Jericho. Elisha had refused to leave his master before the departure at the Jordan. Now the woman refused to leave the prophet while her son lay dead. Elisha rose and followed her. Gehazi had gone ahead. He entered the room and laid the staff upon the child's face. There was no sound or sign of life from the boy. Gehazi returned to meet Elisha and reported, "The child has not awakened." The staff had reached the room. The servant had followed the instruction, but the child remained as his mother had left him. Elisha continued to the house. When he entered his room, the child was lying dead on his bed. Elisha went inside, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. The mother, husband, servant, and Gehazi were outside the closed room. Elisha and the child were inside. The prophet's first action was not with the staff that had already touched the boy's face. He prayed. Then Elisha went up onto the bed and lay upon the child. He placed his mouth upon the boy's mouth, his eyes upon the boy's eyes, and his hands upon the boy's hands. As he stretched himself upon him, the child's body became warm. Warmth was a change, but Elisha did not yet open the door or call the mother. He got down from the bed and walked once back and forth in the house. Then he went up and stretched himself upon the child again. The boy sneezed 7 times. Then he opened his eyes. The movement from death to life came in stages visible to Elisha inside the closed room. First, the body grew warm. After Elisha walked through the house and returned, the child sneezed and opened his eyes. Elisha called Gehazi. "Call this Shunammite." Gehazi called her. When she came to Elisha, he said, "Pick up your son." She entered the room, fell at Elisha's feet, and bowed to the ground. Then she picked up her son and went out. The words Elijah had once spoken to the widow at Zarephath now found their answer in Elisha's room at Shunem. The mother received her living child, yet the 2 restorations had reached the prophets through different paths. Elijah had carried the dead boy upstairs and cried out over the calamity that had struck the widow sheltering him. The Shunammite carried her own son upstairs, laid him on Elisha's bed, and traveled to Carmel to bring the prophet back. Gehazi's staff did not awaken the child. The result came after Elisha entered, closed the door, prayed, and stretched himself upon the boy twice. The mother's determined journey brought Elisha into the room, but the life of her son returned through the Lord to whom Elisha prayed. The relationship with the Shunammite household had begun with repeated meals freely offered to a passing prophet. It developed through a room constructed for his use and a promise the woman had not requested. That promise became a child she embraced at the appointed time. When the child died, the promise itself drove her actions. She did not leave him among the reapers or place him elsewhere in the house. She laid him on the prophet's bed. She did not stop when Gehazi met her. She went to Elisha, held his feet, and refused to leave him. Now she carried her son out of the same room alive. Elisha's authority had already filled a valley for 3 kings. Here it preserved 2 sons from a creditor through oil poured behind a closed door, then restored another son behind a different closed door. The first household received enough to pay its debt and live. The second received back the child whose birth had begun with Elisha's word. Outside those rooms, hunger and sickness still pressed upon the communities through which Elisha traveled. The next need would meet him among the sons of the prophets, where a pot prepared during famine would place death before an entire group at once. Elisha returned to Gilgal while famine was in the land. The sons of the prophets were sitting before him when he told his servant, "Set on the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets." One of the men went into the field to gather herbs. He found a wild vine and collected a lapful of its gourds. He returned and sliced them into the pot, although the men did not know what they were. The stew was poured out for the group to eat. As soon as they tasted it, they cried, "O man of God, there is death in the pot." They could not eat it. Elisha said, "Then bring flour." He threw the flour into the pot and said, "Pour some out for the men, that they may eat." The food was served again, and there was no harm in the pot. During the famine, a large meal prepared for the prophetic community had become unusable because of an unknown plant gathered from the field. Elisha's action did not replace the stew. The same pot that prompted the cry of death was served after the flour was thrown in and the men could eat. Another provision arrived through a man who came from Baal Shalisha. He brought the man of God bread made from the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and fresh grain in his sack. Elisha said, "Give to the men that they may eat." His servant looked at the amount and asked, "How can I set this before 100 men?" Elisha repeated the instruction and added a promise. "Give them to the men, that they may eat, for thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left." The servant placed the food before them. The 100 men ate, and some remained, according to the word of the Lord. The 2 meals answered different forms of scarcity. In the first, the pot was large enough, but its contents brought danger. In the second, the food was good, but the servant saw 20 loaves against 100 men. One meal was made harmless, the other proved sufficient, with food left after everyone had eaten. Then Elisha's work crossed into the household of the man commanding Israel's enemy. Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Syria. He was a great man before his master and held in high favor, because through him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor. He also had leprosy. Naaman possessed military authority, royal favor, and a record of victory. The disease remained attached to the commander beneath every honor. Syrian raiding parties had gone out and taken captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She served Naaman's wife. The captive girl spoke to her mistress, "Would that my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." The first person to point Naaman toward healing was not one of his soldiers, the Syrian king, or a member of his own household. It was the Israelite girl carried away in a raid and placed in service to his wife. Naaman went to his master and reported what the girl from Israel had said. The king of Syria answered, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." The girl had spoken about the prophet in Samaria. The Syrian king addressed the king of Israel. Naaman departed, carrying 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. He also carried the royal letter. The letter said, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." The request reached the royal palace stripped of the one detail that made healing possible. The Israelite girl had named the prophet. The Syrian king's letter told Israel's king to cure Naaman. When the king of Israel read it, he tore his clothes. "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy?" Then he drew a political conclusion. "Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." The king understood that curing leprosy lay beyond royal power, but he treated the impossible demand as a Syrian attempt to create conflict. Elisha heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes. He sent a message, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." The king had asked whether he possessed the power of God over life and death. Elisha did not claim that power for the throne. He redirected Naaman to the prophet the captive girl had identified from the beginning. Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stopped at the entrance of Elisha's house.
My lord,
The commander
North for
arrived
southern
with the
borders.
visible weight of his rank,
Skirmishers are pressing
but
hard
Elisha
against the
did
outer
not go
defenses.
out to
We
receive
need
him.
reinforcements.
He sent a
This
messenger.
is the sevenfold decree.
Go and wash
They
in the
must wash
Jordan
themselves
7
and their
times,
garments 7
and your
times in
flesh
the
shall be
Jordan,
restored,
facing east,
and you
as
shall be
commanded.
clean. The instruction gave Naaman a place, an action, a number, and a promised result. He was to wash in the Jordan 7 times. His flesh would be restored, and the disease would be removed. Naaman became angry and went away. He explained what he had expected. Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the place, and cure the leper. Naaman had arrived anticipating a personal appearance and a visible prophetic gesture over his diseased skin. Instead, a messenger told him to
They call
wash.
those rivers.
He
We
compared
have
the
ditches
Jordan
deeper than
with
that.
the rivers of his own
Let them
country.
keep their muddy streams.
Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? He turned away in a rage. The commander, who had listened to a captive girl, now resisted the simple direction delivered by Elisha's messenger. His objection was not that washing was impossible. It was that Syria had rivers he considered better, and the prophet had not treated him as he expected. Naaman's servants came near and spoke to him. My father, if the
cross
prophet
here,
had told
the
you
mud
to
will
do
bog
some
down
great
the
thing,
supplies.
would you not
The
have done
river
it?
bends yonder where
How
the
much
ground is
more then,
firmer.
when he says to you, wash and be clean? Their question separated difficulty from obedience. Naaman was prepared for a great act. The instruction required him to descend into Israel's river and wash. Naaman went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. After the 7th immersion, his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. He was clean. The Jordan did not need to be greater than the rivers of Damascus. Naaman's restoration depended on doing what had been spoken. The promised result came at the exact completion of the command, 7 immersions according to Elisha's word. Naaman returned to the man of God with all his company. This time he went in and stood before Elisha. Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. The Syrian commander's journey had begun with the testimony of an Israelite servant girl. It reached its turning point when his own servants persuaded him to obey. Now Naaman himself confessed what the healing had taught him. He asked Elisha to accept a gift. Now therefore accept a present from your servant. Elisha answered with an oath, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. Naaman urged him to accept, but Elisha refused. The silver, gold, and clothing that had accompanied Naaman from Syria remained with him. The healing was not exchanged for royal wealth, military status, or payment after the fact. Naaman then made another request. If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth, for from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. The confession now became an announced change in worship. Naaman asked to take earth with him and declared that his offerings would be made only to the Lord. But his position under the Syrian king created one situation he placed openly before Elisha. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. Naaman's service required him to support the king as the king entered Rimmon's temple and bowed. The man who had just declared that he would sacrifice only to the Lord asked for pardon concerning that royal duty. Elisha answered, Go in peace. Naaman departed and had traveled only a short distance when Gehazi made his own decision. See, my master has spared this Naaman the Syrian in not accepting from his hand what he brought. Then Gehazi swore by the living Lord that he would run after Naaman and obtain something from him. Elisha had refused the gift with an oath, "As the Lord lives." Gehazi now invoked the same living Lord, while deciding to reverse his master's refusal for his own gain. He ran after Naaman. When Naaman saw someone running behind him, he climbed down from his chariot to meet him. "Is all well?" Naaman asked. Gehazi answered, "All is well." Then he invented a message from Elisha. "My master has sent me to say, there have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing." The request was designed to look like a new need that had arisen after Elisha sent Naaman away. Gehazi named 2 young prophets and asked for money and clothing on their behalf. Naaman replied, "Be pleased to accept 2 talents." He urged Gehazi and gave twice the amount of silver requested. He tied the 2 talents in 2 bags, added 2 changes of clothing, and placed them upon 2 of his servants. The servants carried the gifts ahead of Gehazi. When they reached the hill, Gehazi took the bags from their hands and stored them in the house. Then he sent the men away, and they departed. Gehazi went in and stood before Elisha. Elisha asked, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" Gehazi answered, "Your servant went nowhere." The deception had moved through every stage. Gehazi misrepresented Elisha to Naaman, used invented members of the prophetic community to justify the request, concealed the gifts, dismissed Naaman's servants, and then denied having gone anywhere. Elisha replied, "Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you?" Naaman's courteous act had been visible to Elisha, even though Gehazi had run beyond his physical presence. Elisha continued, "Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants?" The silver and clothing represented more than 2 hidden bags. They opened toward the property, livestock, and servants' wealth could obtain. Gehazi had treated Naaman's healing as an opportunity for acquisition immediately after Elisha refused to receive anything. The consequence matched the gift he had taken from the healed man. "Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever." Gehazi went out from Elisha's presence leprous, his skin white as snow. Naaman had arrived diseased and carrying wealth. He left clean after keeping the wealth Elisha refused. Gehazi began healthy beside the prophet. He obtained part of Naaman's treasure through deception and left carrying the disease Naaman had lost. The reversal made Elisha's position unmistakable on both sides of the border. A Syrian commander had been healed without payment and had confessed the God of Israel. The prophet's own servant had learned that proximity to Elisha could not turn that grace into private profit. Naaman's company had seen the transformation. The Syrian king had sent him with a royal letter. Servants in both countries had shaped the outcome. The captive girl pointed toward Elisha. Naaman's attendants persuaded him to wash, and Gehazi's deception exposed the difference between serving the prophet and using his name. Elisha's reputation had now reached directly into Syria's military command. That recognition would soon take another form. The same kingdom whose commander had found healing through Elisha would discover that its military movements were being revealed to Israel through him. And the Syrian response would not be another request for help. It would be an order to find the prophet and seize him. The sons of the prophet said to Elisha, "See, the place where we dwell under your charge is too small for us." They proposed a solution. "Let us go to the Jordan, and each of us get there a log, and let us make a place for us to dwell there." Elisha answered, "Go." One of them asked, "Please be willing to go with your servants." Elisha replied, "I will go." He went with them to the Jordan, and the men began cutting down trees. As one of them was felling a log, the iron axe head fell into the water. He cried out, "Alas, my master, it was borrowed. The work stopped at a loss the man could not repair simply by selecting another tree. The iron belonged to someone else, and it had disappeared beneath the river." Elisha asked, "Where did it fall?" The man showed him the place. Elisha cut off a stick and threw it into the water. The iron axe head floated to the surface. "Take it up," Elisha said. The man reached out his hand and took it. The miracle restored a borrowed tool to one member of the prophetic community. Elisha had divided the Jordan with Elijah's cloak. Here, the river yielded a piece of iron at the point where one distressed man identified its fall. The scale soon changed. The king of Syria was making war against Israel. He consulted with his servants and chose a place where his camp would be positioned. Elisha sent a warning to the king of Israel. "Beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are going down there." The king of Israel sent men to the location the man of God had identified. The warning proved true, and the king guarded himself there. This happened repeatedly. The Syrian king planned his movements with his servants, yet the king of Israel received advanced knowledge of the selected positions. Each warning prevented the Syrian plan from producing its intended result. The king of Syria became deeply troubled. He summoned his servants. "Will you not show me who of us is for the king of Israel?" The pattern looked like betrayal from within his own circle. The locations discussed among the Syrian king and his servants were reaching Israel in time for the Israelite king to respond. One of the servants answered, "None, my lord, O king. Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom." The threat was not a disloyal Syrian officer. It was the prophet in Israel. According to the servant, even the words spoken in the king's private room were open to Elisha. The king gave a new order. "Go and see where he is, that I may send and seize him." The military effort shifted from attacking Israel at places Elisha could reveal to capturing Elisha himself. The king received a report. "Behold, he is in Dothan." He sent horses, chariots, and a great army. They came by night and surrounded the city. The operation used secrecy, speed, and overwhelming force. Elisha had been located, and before morning the roads around him were controlled by Syrian soldiers. The servant of the man of God rose early and went outside. He saw the army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" The servant's question matched what his eyes could see. The city was encircled. Syrian forces stood around it. The king who wanted Elisha seized had sent enough men to prevent an ordinary escape. Elisha answered, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." The servant had seen the Syrians. Elisha spoke of another force already present. Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." The Lord opened the servant's eyes. He saw the mountain full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The Syrian army had surrounded the city. The fiery army surrounded Elisha. The servant's first sight had been accurate but incomplete. The danger was real, and so was the protection he had been unable to see until Elisha prayed. The fire did not descend upon the Syrian soldiers as it had upon Hazael's first two detachments. Elisha's next prayer concerned their sight. As the Syrians came down toward him, Elisha prayed, "Please strike this people with blindness." They were struck with blindness, according to Elisha's prayer. The army sent to find and capture one man now needed that man to guide it. Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek." He led them to Samaria. The Syrian king had sent his force to Dothan because Elisha was there. Elisha now took that force away from Dothan and brought it into Israel's capital. When they entered Samaria, Elisha prayed again, "O Lord, open the eyes of these men, that they may see." The Lord opened their eyes. They saw that they were inside Samaria. The men who had surrounded Dothan now stood surrounded within the city of the king they had been fighting. Their sight returned only after Elisha had led them into the center of Israelite power. When the king of Israel saw them, he addressed Elisha, "My father, shall I strike them down? Shall I strike them down?" The king did not act before asking the prophet. The Syrian soldiers appeared to have been delivered into his hand, and he asked twice for permission to kill them. Elisha answered, "You shall not strike them down." Then he framed their position as captives. "Would you strike down those whom you have taken captive with your sword and with your bow?" The king had not captured these soldiers through his own weapons. Elisha had led them into Samaria under blindness. Their helplessness did not give the king permission to execute them. Elisha gave a different command. "Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master." The force sent to seize Elisha would be released. Before leaving, the soldiers were to receive food and water from the kingdom they had entered as enemies. The king prepared a great feast for them. The Syrians ate and drank. Then the king sent them away, and they returned to their master. The sequence overturned every purpose with which they had approached Dothan. They came to take Elisha. Elisha led them. They came as an army surrounding an Israelite city. They ended as captives inside Samaria. They expected military action. They received a feast and permission to return home. The outcome also changed what the king of Israel learned about Elisha's authority. Elisha had repeatedly protected him by revealing Syrian positions. Then he brought the attacking force directly into Samaria. Yet he would not allow the king to turn prophetic deliverance into slaughter. The king obeyed. The prisoners were fed rather than killed, and the force went back to Syria, carrying direct knowledge of what had happened. The servant at Dothan had received another kind of knowledge. At sunrise, he saw the city surrounded and believed the visible army defined their position. When his eyes were opened, he saw horses and chariots of fire around Elisha. Those fiery forces did not need to attack for the prophet to be protected. The Syrian soldiers lost their sight, followed the man they had come to capture, and recovered their vision only when escape depended on Elisha's command and the Israelite king's obedience. The movement from the Jordan to Samaria therefore joined the smallest threatened possession to a national military crisis. A borrowed axe head rose within reach of one man's hand. An entire Syrian force was moved from Dothan into Samaria without winning the battle it had come to fight. In both events, the immediate problem was defined by what had disappeared from sight. The axe head sank beneath the river. The servant could not see the fiery army around Elisha. The Syrians themselves were then struck so that they could not see the way before them. But Elisha's authority was not a performance built around hidden things. Each event moved toward a concrete result. The borrowed iron was recovered. The frightened servants saw the protection around them. The blinded soldiers were prevented from seizing Elisha, brought under Israelite control, fed, and released. The Syrian raiding bands stopped coming into the land of Israel. That outcome followed an act of restraint at the moment Israel had the advantage. The king asked to kill the captives. Elisha ordered him to feed them. A great feast replaced the requested execution, and the released men returned to the king who had sent them. For a time, the repeated raids were over, but the conflict between Syria and Israel had not reached its end. The king who had tried to seize Elisha through a targeted force would next surround Samaria itself, and the city that had once fed captured Syrians would face a famine so severe that its own king would turn against the prophet within its walls. Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered his entire army and went up to besiege Samaria. The city that had once held a captured Syrian force and fed it now faced the full weight of the Syrian army outside its walls. The siege produced a severe famine. Food became so scarce that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter measure of dove's dung sold for 5 shekels. As the king of Israel was passing along the wall, a woman cried out to him, "Help, my lord, O king." He answered, "If the Lord will not help you, how shall I help you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" The king had no grain or wine to offer her. He then asked, "What is your trouble?" Her answer exposed a horror deeper than the market prices. "This woman said to me, 'Give your son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' The agreement had been carried out on the first day. So we boiled my son and ate him. Then the other woman broke the arrangement. On the next day I said to her, 'Give your son that we may eat him,' but she has hidden her son." The woman appealed to the king because the second mother had withheld the child promised for the next meal. The royal dispute brought before him was no longer over property, debt, or land. Starvation had reduced two mothers to an agreement to consume their own sons, and one child had already been killed and eaten. When the king heard her words, he tore his clothes while continuing along the wall. The people could see that he was wearing sackcloth beneath his clothing. Then the king swore, "May God do so to me, and more also, if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today." The Syrian army had created the siege. The famine had produced the woman's appeal. But the king directed his oath toward Elisha. The prophet was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a man ahead of him. Before the messenger arrived, Elisha spoke to the elders. "Do you see how this murderer has sent to take off my head?" Elisha knew both the order and the movement toward his door. "When the messenger comes, shut the door and hold the door fast against him." Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him? The messenger was not acting independently. The king who sent him was coming behind. While Elisha was still speaking, the messenger arrived. Then came the accusation from the king. "This trouble is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" The king had blamed Elisha with an oath against his life, but his own words acknowledged that the calamity stood beneath the Lord's authority. He saw no reason to continue waiting for deliverance. Elisha answered with a precise promise. "Hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time, a measure of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." Within one day, the city's food market would be transformed. The gate, where scarcity had driven prices to the value of silver, would offer flour and barley in abundance. The officer on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God. "If the Lord himself should make windows in heaven, could this thing be?" The officer placed Elisha's promise beyond belief, even if heaven itself were opened. Elisha replied, "You shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it." 2 outcomes were now fixed for the following day. Samaria would see abundance at the announced prices, and the officer who mocked the promise would witness it without sharing in it. Outside the city gate sat 4 men with leprosy. They spoke to one another. "Why are we sitting here until we die?" They laid out the choices available to them. "If we say, 'Let us enter the city,' the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. If we sit here, we die also." Only the Syrian camp offered an outcome other than certain death. "Now, therefore, come, and let us go over to the camp of the Syrians. If they spare our lives, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall but die." At twilight, the 4 men rose and went toward the Syrian camp. When they reached the edge of it, they found no one there. The Lord had caused the Syrian army to hear the sound of chariots, horses, and a great army. The Syrians had spoken to one another. "Behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come against us." They rose and fled in the twilight. They left their tents, horses, and donkeys. The camp remained as it had been, while the men ran for their lives. The army outside Samaria had not been attacked by an Israelite force. It had heard a force the Lord caused it to hear, and concluded that multiple foreign kings were approaching. The soldiers abandoned the siege without taking time to remove their supplies or animals. The 4 men with leprosy knew none of that when they approached. They had expected either mercy or death at Syrian hands. Instead, the camp was open. They entered one of the tents. They ate and drank. Then they carried away silver, gold, and clothing and went out to hide them. They returned and entered another tent. Again they carried away goods and hid them. The men who had been sitting between 2 places of death now found more food and wealth than they could use at once. Then they spoke to one another. "We are not doing right. This day is a day of good news. If we are silent and wait until the morning light, punishment will overtake us." They had entered the camp thinking only of survival. After eating, drinking, and hiding goods from 2 tents, they recognized that an entire starving city remained unaware that the enemy had fled. "Now, therefore, come. Let us go and tell the king's household." They returned to Samaria and called to the gatekeepers of the city. "We came to the camp of the Syrians, and behold, there was no one to be seen or heard there. Nothing but the horses tied and the donkeys tied and the tents as they were." The gatekeepers called out the news, and it was reported inside the king's household. The announcement reached the king during the night. He rose and spoke to his servants. "I will tell you what the Syrians have done to us." The empty camp did not persuade him that the siege had ended. "They know that we are hungry. Therefore they have gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the open country, thinking, when they come out of the city, we shall take them alive and get into the city." The king interpreted the abandoned supplies as bait. If Samaria's starving population rushed outside, concealed Syrian soldiers would capture them and enter through the open city. One of his servants proposed a limited test. "Let some men take 5 of the remaining horses, seeing that those who are left here will fare like the whole multitude of Israel who have already perished. Let us send and see." The horses sent out might be lost, but remaining inside offered no better end. The servant's reasoning matched that of the 4 men at the gate. Action did not create the danger because death was already closing around them. The king sent 2 chariots with horses after the Syrian army. "Go and see," he ordered. The men followed the trail as far as the Jordan. The entire road was strewn with garments and equipment the Syrians had thrown away in their haste. The messengers returned and told the king the abandoned camp was not an ambush. The Syrian retreat had continued all the way toward the Jordan, leaving evidence along the road. The people went out and plundered the Syrian camp. A measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. The change happened at the time and place Elisha had named. One day earlier, the king had heard a mother describe the eating of her son. Now food from the enemy camp flooded the market at Samaria's gate. The 4 men with leprosy had become the first human witnesses of the deliverance. Their position outside the gate brought them to the Syrian tents, before anyone inside the city knew the army had fled. Their initial gathering of silver, gold, and clothing gave way to an announcement that opened the camp to everyone. The king's suspicion delayed the response long enough to test the road. The 2 chariots returned with confirmation. Once the city moved, the supplies intended to sustain the besieging army became the food that ended the famine. The king appointed the officer who had answered Elisha to supervise the gate. The same officer had leaned on the king's hand when Elisha promised abundance. Now he stood at the location where that promise was being fulfilled. The people trampled him in the gate, and he died. He saw the flour and barley sold at the announced prices, but he did not eat of them, exactly as Elisha had told him. Both parts of the prophetic word were completed together. The abundance the officer said could not happen arrived without windows opening in heaven. The food came from tents abandoned when the Syrian army heard chariots, horses, and a great force that Israel never had to assemble. The officer's death was not an added sentence after the deliverance. It had been spoken at the moment of his contempt. He would see with his eyes, but not eat. His assignment at the gate placed him before the abundance and beneath the movement of the people rushing toward it. Samaria survived without defeating Ben-Hadad in a conventional battle. Its walls did not break the siege. Its king did not devise the means of escape. The 4 excluded men did not drive the Syrians away. The decisive action took place in the hearing of the enemy army, which fled from a sound and left everything the city needed behind. Elisha remained inside Samaria through the king's attempt against his life. The man ordered to lose his head became the one who told the king what the market would look like the next day. The contrast was exact. The king said the trouble came from the Lord and asked why he should wait any longer. Elisha announced that waiting until the same hour tomorrow would reveal a complete reversal. By the next day, the king still occupied the city, the famine had broken, and the Syrian camp had been stripped by the people it was meant to starve. Yet, Ben-Hadad remained king of Syria, and the pressure from that kingdom had not disappeared with one abandoned siege. Elijah had once received a name at Horeb for Syria's future: Hazael. Elisha would soon stand before that man, and the encounter would join healing, royal death, and a devastating future in a way that brought one of Elijah's oldest unfinished commissions into motion. At a separate point in Elisha's ministry, a 7-year famine shaped the life of the Shunammite household he had already helped. Elisha had told the woman whose son he restored, "Arise and depart with your household, and stay wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and it will come upon the land for 7 years." The woman obeyed the man of God. She left with her household and stayed in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. When the 7 years ended, she returned from the land of the Philistines and went to appeal to the king for her house and land. At that moment, the king was speaking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. "Tell me all the great things that Elisha has done." Gehazi was describing how Elisha had restored the dead to life when the woman whose son had been restored appeared before the king to make her appeal. Gehazi identified her. "My lord, O king, here is the woman, and here is her son whom Elisha restored to life." The king questioned the woman, and she told him what had happened. He appointed an official to handle her claim. "Restore all that was hers, together with all the produce of the fields, from the day that she left the land until now." Elisha's warning had preserved the household through the famine by sending it away before the 7 years began. The woman's return placed her before a king who was already hearing about the restoration of her son. Gehazi's testimony and her appearance came together at the moment of appeal, and the royal order restored not only the house and land, but also the yield produced during her absence. In Damascus, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, became ill. The king was told, "The man of God has come here." The Syrian ruler, who had once sent an army to seize Elisha, now responded to the prophet's presence by sending his most trusted servant to seek an answer about his illness. Ben-Hadad said to Hazael, "Take a present with you and go to meet the man of God. Inquire of the Lord through him, saying, 'Shall I recover from this sickness?'" Hazael went to meet Elisha. He took a gift made from every kind of good thing in Damascus, enough to load 40 camels. He stood before Elisha and delivered the king's question. "Your son, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent me to you, saying, 'Shall I recover from this sickness?'" Elisha answered, "Go, say to him, 'You shall certainly recover.' But the Lord has shown me that he shall certainly die." The illness itself allowed one answer: the king could recover from it, yet Elisha had been shown a death that would still occur. Then Elisha fixed his gaze on Hazael until Hazael became uncomfortable. The man of God began to weep. Hazael asked, "Why does my lord weep?" Elisha answered by naming what Hazael would do to Israel. because I know the evil that you will do to the people of Israel." He described burned fortresses, young men killed with the sword, little children dashed to pieces, and pregnant women ripped open. The conflict with Syria would no longer be limited to a besieged city, raiding bands or battles between armed forces. Elisha saw violence reaching fortified places, soldiers, children, and women carrying unborn life. Hazael answered, "What is your servant who is but a dog, that he should do this great thing?" Elisha replied, "The Lord has shown me that you are to be king over Syria." The name Elijah had received at Horeb now stood before Elisha in Damascus. Hazael was not yet king when Elisha spoke. He was the servant carrying Ben-Hadad's question and gift. Hazael left Elisha and returned to his master. Ben-Hadad asked, "What did Elisha say to you?" Hazael answered, "He told me that you would certainly recover." He delivered the part of Elisha's answer concerning the sickness. The other part concerned the king's death. The next day, Hazael took a cloth, dipped it in water, and spread it over Ben-Hadad's face. The king died. Hazael became king in his place. The sequence completed the distinction Elisha had given. Ben-Hadad's illness did not prevent recovery, but the king did not live. Hazael killed him and took the throne Elisha had said would be his. Hazael's rise fulfilled one appointment given to Elijah at Horeb, but it also activated the future that made Elisha weep. The new Syrian king would become the source of the violence Elisha had described against Israel. At the same time, the ruling houses of Israel and Judah had become joined by marriage. Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, became king of Judah during the reign of Joram, son of Ahab, in Israel. Jehoram of Judah was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he ruled for 8 years in Jerusalem. He followed the way of the kings of Israel because a daughter of Ahab was his wife. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. During his reign, Edom rebelled against Judah and established its own king. Libnah also rebelled. When Jehoram of Judah died, his son Ahaziah became king in his place. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he began to reign, and he ruled for 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother was Athaliah, a descendant of Omri. Ahaziah also followed the way of Ahab's house and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. His connection to Ahab's family was not distant. His mother belonged to that house, and the royal marriage had joined Judah's throne to Israel's dynasty. That connection brought Ahaziah of Judah into war beside Joram of Israel. The two kings went to Ramoth-Gilead to fight Hazael, king of Syria. The Syrians wounded Joram. Joram returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds he had received at Ramoth-Gilead. Ahaziah went down to visit him because he was wounded. The arrangement placed both kings in the same movement. Joram, a son of Ahab, lay wounded at Jezreel. Ahaziah, connected to Ahab's house through his mother, came to see him. Hazael had inflicted the wounds that brought them together there. While Joram recovered, Elisha called one of the sons of the prophets. "Tie up your garment and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth-Gilead." Elisha then identified the man the young prophet was to find. "When you arrive, look there for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi." Jehu was among the commanders stationed at Ramoth-Gilead, the same place where Joram had been wounded by the Syrians. Elisha continued, "Go in and have him rise from among his fellows. Lead him to an inner chamber." The anointing was not to occur before all the commanders. The young prophet was to separate Jehu from the group. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and say, "Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel." Then open the door and flee. Do not delay. The commission was exact and urgent. Find Jehu, take him into a private room, pour the oil, declare the anointing, and leave immediately. The young prophet went to Ramoth-Gilead. When he arrived, the commanders of the army were sitting together. He said, "I have a word for you, O commander." Jehu asked, "For which of us?" The prophet answered, "For you, O commander." Jehu rose and entered the house with him. The young
By the will
prophet
of the
poured the
gods,
oil
you
on
are chosen
Jehu's
to
head.
rule over these
"Thus
lands.
says the Lord, the God of
Your
Israel,
reign shall
I
be
anoint you
long and
king over the
prosperous."
people of the Lord, over Israel." The declaration made Jehu king while Joram still occupied the throne. Then the prophet gave him the
Hear
work
the
attached to
judgment of
that
the Most
kingship.
High.
"You shall
Your
strike
throne will
down
be
the house
torn
of
down,
Ahab your
and your
master,
lineage shall
so
be
that I may
broken for the
avenge on
evil you have
Jezebel
done.
the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord." The judgment pronounced in Naboth's vineyard now joined the blood Jezebel had shed among the Lord's servants. Jehu was not merely being offered a throne, he was being appointed to destroy the dynasty he currently served. "The whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel." Ahab's house would become like the house of Jeroboam son of Nebat and the house of Baasha son of Ahijah. The two earlier dynasties Elijah had named in the vineyard were named again. Then came the sentence against Jezebel. "The dogs shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her." The words carried Elijah's old judgment into Jehu's private anointing. Jezebel remained in Jezreel, where Joram was recovering and Hazael was visiting. The place of her appointed death was the same city where the wounded kings had gathered. The young prophet opened the door and fled. Jehu returned to the servants of his master. They asked, "Is all well? Why did this mad fellow come to you?" Jehu answered, "You know the fellow and his talk." They replied, "That is not true. Tell us
Gods have
now."
spoken. A new
Jehu
king will
told
rise
them
from
what had
among us,
happened.
chosen by the
Thus
serpent.
and so he spoke to
must
me,
prepare
saying,
for his
"Thus
arrival."
says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel." The commanders responded immediately. Each man took his garment and placed it under Jehu on the bare steps. Then they blew the trumpet and proclaimed, "Jehu is king." The private anointing became a public acclamation among the military commanders. The men who had been sitting with Jehu placed their own garments beneath him and announced the new kingship. Two delayed appointments from Horeb were now in motion at once. Hazael ruled Syria after killing Ben-Hadad. Jehu had been anointed king over Israel and acclaimed by the commanders at Ramoth-Gilead. Their positions were connected through the wounded king in Jezreel. Hazael's Syrians had injured Joram. That injury removed him from Ramoth-Gilead and left Jehu among the commanders there. Elisha's messenger then entered the military camp and anointed Jehu to replace the absent king. The balance of power had shifted before Joram received any report from Ramoth-Gilead. His commanders had acclaimed another ruler. The man they proclaimed had been ordered to strike Ahab's entire house and avenge the blood of the Lord's servants. Joram remained in Jezreel, recovering from his wounds. Ahaziah of Judah remained connected to him through Ahab's family. Jezebel remained in the city named in the sentence against her. Jehu now held the command, the anointing, and the support of the officers around him. The trumpet had sounded at Ramoth-Gilead. The next movement would carry Jehu toward Jezreel, where the surviving members of Ahab's house were gathered under the full weight of Elijah's unfinished word. Jehu formed a conspiracy against Joram. The king had guarded Ramoth-Gilead with Israel's army against Hazael. After being wounded by the Syrians, he returned to Jezreel to recover. Jehu told the other commanders, "If this is your decision, then let no one slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel." The revolt depended on reaching the wounded king before a warning could reach him. Jehu mounted his chariot and rode toward Jezreel. A watchman standing on the tower at Jezreel saw Jehu's company approaching. "I see a company," he reported. Joram ordered, "Take a horseman and send him to meet them and let him say, 'Is it peace?'" The horseman rode out to Jehu. "Thus says the king, 'Is it peace?'" Jehu answered, "What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me." The messenger joined Jehu's company. The watchman reported, "The messenger reached them, but he is not coming back." Joram sent a second horseman. He reached Jehu and said, "Thus says the king, is it peace?" Jehu gave him the same answer. "What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me." The watchman reported that the second messenger had reached the company but was not returning. Then he identified the driver. The driving is like the driving of Jehu son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Joram ordered, "Make ready." His chariot was prepared. Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, each went out in his own chariot to meet Jehu. They met him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite, the ground chosen through Jezebel's false accusation and Naboth's death, now became the meeting place between Ahab's son and the man anointed to destroy Ahab's house. When Joram saw Jehu, he asked, "Is it peace, Jehu?" Jehu answered, "What peace can there be so long as the sexual immorality and sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many?" Joram turned his chariot and fled. "Treachery, O Ahaziah!" he cried. Jehu drew his bow with his full strength. The arrow struck Joram between the shoulders and passed through his heart. Joram collapsed in his chariot. Jehu said to his officer Bidkar, "Take him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite." Then he reminded Bidkar of a moment both men had witnessed. "Remember, when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab his father, how the Lord laid this sentence upon him. As surely as I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, I will repay you on this plot of ground." Jehu ordered, "Now therefore take him up and throw him on the plot of ground, in accordance with the word of the Lord." Joram had left Jezreel asking whether Jehu brought peace. He returned to Naboth's property as a dead man, and his body was cast onto the land his father had taken. Ahaziah saw what had happened and fled toward Beth-Hagan. Jehu pursued him. "Shoot him also," Jehu ordered. Ahaziah was wounded in his chariot near the ascent of Gur by Ibleam. He continued to Megiddo and died there. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. Both kings connected to Ahab's house had gone out together to meet Jehu. Neither returned alive. Joram died on Naboth's land. Ahaziah's flight carried him away from Jezreel, but not beyond Jehu's pursuit. Jehu then entered Jezreel. When Jezebel heard that he was coming, she painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and looked down from a window. As Jehu passed through the gate, she called to him, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" Jehu looked up toward the window. "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him. "Throw her down," Jehu said. They threw Jezebel from the window. Her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses. Jehu drove over her. Then he went inside, ate, and drank. Afterward he said, "See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." The men went to bury Jezebel. They found only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. They returned and reported what remained. Jehu answered, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the body of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, 'This is Jezebel.'" The sentence spoken in Naboth's vineyard had reached the woman who arranged Naboth's death. Jezebel had lived long enough to see Ahab die, Ahaziah die, and Joram take the throne. She now fell within the city named by Elijah, and the attempt to bury her found only fragments. But Ahab's house extended beyond Joram and Jezebel. 70 sons of Ahab were in Samaria. Jehu wrote letters to the officials, elders, and guardians responsible for them. The first letter challenged them to defend the dynasty. As soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses, fortified cities also, and weapons, select the best and most suitable of your master's sons. Set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house." The recipients were terrified. "Behold, the two kings could not stand before him. How then can we stand? The steward of the palace, the governor of the city, the elders and the guardians sent their answer to Jehu. 'We are your servants, and we will do all that you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes.' Jehu wrote a second letter. 'If you are on my side and will obey my voice, take the heads of your master's sons and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time.' The 70 royal sons were with the leading men of the city who were raising them. When the letter arrived, the guardians slaughtered all 70. They placed their heads in baskets and sent them to Jehu at Jezreel. The messenger reported, 'They have brought the heads of the king's sons.' Jehu ordered, 'Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning.' The heads were placed at the gate. In the morning, Jehu went out and stood before the people. 'You are innocent,' he said. 'Behold, I conspired against my master and killed him, but who struck down all these?' The officials who refused to fight for Ahab's house had carried out Jehu's second demand. Their submission completed the destruction of the king's sons. Jehu then identified the larger force behind what had happened. 'Know then that not a word of the Lord shall fall to the earth concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he spoke by his servant Elijah.' The revolt was ruthless, but its central outcome had been announced before Jehu was anointed. Ahab's dynasty would be swept away. The death of Joram, Jezebel, and the 70 sons brought that sentence into visible fulfillment. Jehu struck down everyone remaining from Ahab's house in Jezreel, along with his great men, close friends and priests, until no survivor remained there. Then Jehu departed for Samaria. At Beth-eked of the shepherds, he met relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah. 'Who are you?' Jehu asked. They answered, 'We are relatives of Ahaziah, and we came down to visit the royal princes and the sons of the queen mother.' Jehu ordered, 'Take them alive.' His men took 42 of them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth-eked. None was spared. Continuing from there, Jehu met Jehonadab, son of Rechab, coming toward him. Jehu greeted him and asked, 'Is your heart true to my heart as mine is to yours?' Jehonadab answered, 'It is. If it is, give me your hand.' Jehonadab gave him his hand, and Jehu brought him up into the chariot. 'Come with me,' Jehu said, 'and see my zeal for the Lord.' Jehonadab rode with him to Samaria. There Jehu killed all who remained to Ahab in Samaria until he had destroyed the house according to the word spoken to Elijah. The dynastic judgment was complete. Jehu then turned toward the religious establishment that Ahab and Jezebel had supported. He gathered all the people and announced, 'Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much.' Jehu ordered a national assembly. 'Call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers and all his priests. Let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live.' Jehu acted deceptively in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. A solemn assembly was proclaimed. Jehu sent throughout Israel, and the worshippers of Baal came. They entered the house of Baal until it was filled from one end to the other. Jehu told the keeper of the wardrobe, 'Bring out the garments for all the worshippers of Baal.' The special garments were brought out for them. Jehu and Jehonadab entered the house. Jehu told the worshippers, 'Search and see that there is no servant of the Lord here among you, but only the worshippers of Baal.' The separation was deliberate. Everyone inside was to be identified with Baal's worship. Jehu and Jehonadab went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Outside, Jehu stationed 80 men. 'The man who allows any of those whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life.' When Jehu finished presenting the burnt offering, he ordered the guards and officers, Go in and strike them down, let not one escape. The guards and officers killed the worshippers with the sword and cast their bodies out. Then they entered the inner room of the house of Baal. They brought out the sacred pillar and burned it. They demolished the pillar and tore down the house itself, turning the site into a latrine. Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. The destruction reached the prophets, priests, worshippers, garments, pillar, and building associated with Baal. The institution Jezebel had supported was gathered into one place by Jehu's deception and eliminated. Yet Jehu did not turn away from all the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. The golden calves remained at Bethel and Dan. The Lord said to Jehu, "Because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel." Jehu had fulfilled his assignment against Ahab's house. His dynasty received a measured promise in return. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He continued in the sins of Jeroboam, which had caused Israel to sin. The man who destroyed Baal's house did not restore Israel's obedience completely. His zeal executed Elijah's sentence, but his reform stopped before the golden calves. During those days, the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel. Hazael defeated the Israelites throughout their territory east of the Jordan. All the land of Gilead, the territories of Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh, from Aroer by the Arnon Valley through Gilead and Bashan. The two men named at Horeb had now transformed the kingdom from opposite directions. Jehu destroyed Ahab's house from within. Hazael cut away Israel's land from outside. Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria for 28 years. When he died, he was buried in Samaria, and his son Jehoahaz became king in his place. Elijah's sentence against Ahab's dynasty had reached its end. Joram had fallen on Naboth's land. Jezebel had died in Jezreel. Ahab's sons and remaining household had been destroyed. Baal's establishment had been torn down, but Israel had not found lasting security. Hazael remained king of Syria, and the territories he seized marked the violence Elisha had foreseen through tears in Damascus. Jehu's son inherited a throne inside a kingdom being steadily reduced by that pressure. Elisha remained alive as the royal generations changed around him. His next appearance before a king would come after years of Syrian oppression, when the prophet himself was dying. From that final bed, he would give Israel one more promise, and the way a king responded would determine how far the promised victory could go. Years passed, and while Joash ruled Judah, Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, became king over Israel in Samaria. He reigned for 17 years. Jehoahaz did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He continued in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which had caused Israel to sin, and he did not turn away from them. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and the kingdom was repeatedly given into the hands of Hazael, king of Syria, and Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael. The territorial losses that began during Jehu's reign now became sustained oppression under his son. Hazael's power reached beyond border raids. Israel's army was steadily reduced beneath Syrian force. Jehoahaz sought the favor of the Lord. The Lord listened to him because he saw the oppression of Israel and how the king of Syria oppressed them. A deliverer was given to Israel. The Israelites escaped from Syria's hand and lived in their homes as before. The preservation was real, but it did not produce a complete change in the kingdom. They did not turn away from the sins of the house of Jeroboam. They continued in them, and the Asherah also remained standing in Samaria. The king's appeal brought relief from destruction, while the practices that had defined Israel's disobedience continued. Jehoahaz sought the Lord under Syrian pressure, but his reign did not remove the institutions that kept Israel in the same path. The damage to his military strength showed how severe the oppression had become. Hazael left Jehoahaz with only 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. The king of Syria had destroyed the rest and made them like dust at threshing. Israel still possessed a king, an army, and its homes, yet the force remaining to Jehoahaz was only a fraction of what royal power required against Syria. Horses, chariots, and infantry had been swept away until the kingdom stood under continuing threat from Hazael. When Jehoahaz died, he was buried in Samaria. His son Jehoash, also called Joash, became king in his place. Joash ruled Israel for 16 years. He also did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, but continued in them. The throne had now passed from Jehu to Jehoahaz, and then to Joash, fulfilling the continuation promised to Jehu's house. But the Syrian pressure inherited by each generation remained tied to the same unfinished conflict. During Joash's reign, Elisha became sick with the illness from which he would die. The king of Israel went down to see him. Joash wept over Elisha and cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." The king's words placed Elisha beside the military power Israel had lost. Jehoahaz had been left with only 10 chariots and 50 horsemen. Joash now stood over the dying prophet and addressed him as the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Elisha did not answer with an assurance that the prophet's life would be extended. He gave the king a series of actions to perform. Get a bow and arrows. Joash brought him a bow and arrows. Elisha said, draw the bow. The king took the bow in his hands. Elisha placed his own hands upon the king's hands. Then he said, open the window eastward. Joash opened it. Shoot, Elisha commanded. The king released the arrow through the eastern window. Elisha declared, the Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Syria. For you shall fight the Syrians at Aphek until you have made an end of them. The direction of the shot and the meaning of the arrow were both named. The king did not fire at an enemy standing outside the window. The arrow became a sign of victory that had not yet occurred. Aphek had been the place where Ahab once defeated a vast Syrian army after Syria's servants claimed that the Lord ruled the hills, but not the plains. Now the dying Elisha named Aphek again as the place where Joash would strike Syria. The prophet's hands rested upon the king's hands as the arrow was released. Israel's military strength did not rest in the number of chariots Hazael had left behind. Victory was being promised through the word spoken beside the window. Elisha then told Joash, take the arrows. The king took them. Elisha said, strike the ground. Joash struck the ground 3 times. Then he stopped. The man of God became angry with him. You should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Syria until you had made an end of it. But now you will strike Syria only 3 times. The first arrow carried an open declaration of complete victory at Aphek. The remaining arrows placed a responsive action in the king's hands. Elisha did not tell Joash in advance how many times to strike. The king struck 3 times and stopped. His stopping established the limit. Joash would defeat Syria, but not until Syrian power was ended. He would receive 3 victories. The promise therefore contained both deliverance and restraint. Israel would recover from the oppression that had reduced its army. Joash would not merely survive Hazael's pressure, he would strike the Syrians. But the king's 3 blows against the ground fixed the number of victories before any of them had taken place. Elisha had given his final royal word. The king came to him weeping over the loss of Israel's chariots and horsemen. He left with a victory arrow fired eastward and 3 promised defeats of Syria. The prophet's dying body did not prevent him from determining the future limit of the king's success. Those victories still lay ahead. Elisha died and was buried. At that time, bands of Moabites used to enter the land in the spring. As some men were burying a man, they saw a raiding band. They threw the dead man into Elisha's grave. When the man's body touched Elisha's bones, he revived and stood on his feet. Hazael continued to oppress Israel throughout the reign of Jehoahaz. Yet the Lord was gracious to Israel and had compassion on them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He would not destroy them or cast them from his presence. Then Hazael died, and his son Ben-Hadad became king of Syria in his place. Joash took back from Ben-Hadad the towns Hazael had captured from Jehoahaz in war. 3 times Joash defeated him, exactly matching the 3 strikes beside Elisha's deathbed. And there they stood again in Israel's hands, the recovered towns, the last visible result of Elisha's word.